Okay, my name is Christine Denaro, and we will start the task force meeting at 5:01. So, where am I? Okay, I'd like to take a roll call. Liz, why don't we start with you?
Liz Marsden, huh?
Malcolm Bryan. Bruce Gillis. Mark Howell.
Chris Denaro,
Bill Kameza.
Vicky Alani,
Toby Berkman, facilitator.
Rachel Creed, facilitator.
Jeff Collins. Keith Hannon. Bert Coleman's staff.
Julia Kay.
anybody online?
To the public, I think.
Yeah, no.
Huh.
And Sami and Sammy are gonna join.
I thought Paul was gonna join too, but no. Yeah, Paul
He
was
said online.
online.
It's not here yet.
Okay,
Okay. All right, so our goals for tonight's meeting are to listen to the short-term actions work group proposal and to hear from the fisheries expert from Mass Wildlife. You can see the agenda on the slide for tonight. We'll open the meeting to public comments as noted on the agenda, and then again at the end. So, public, do we have any comments? Bill, I'll let you introduce that.
well, that's simple. I mean, I think everyone knows, just be respectful in your comments and keep them to no more than 2 minutes. Any public comments?
About approval of minutes, that's
That would be next.
September 10th, second.
Oh,
Well, it will be next now.
there you go. All right, no comments.
I don't see any hands raised online. If anyone online does want to make a comment, feel free to raise your hand, right?
Okay,
All right, so now do I have the minutes of the meeting were sent out for September 10th. Do I have a motion to approve those?
Make a motion to approve the September 10th minutes.
Thank you very much. And anyone second? Thank you. And so, pardon me.
Sorry, I didn't see who made the
Okay,
second.
all right, so the minutes are approved as written. Thank you so
I
much.
think we need a,
Just a
call
vote
vote.
on that.
a roll call, right?
Correct, we do.
Yeah.
Liz?
Aye.
Aye.
Yes, that's what I'm doing.
Mhm. Oh, yeah, never mind.
Non-voting.
Mark?
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Excellent. Okay, the minutes are approved as written. Thank you so much. Okay. Short-term actions, work group proposal and discussion.
Great,
Are you ready, Mr. Howell?
yeah, I'm just about there.
Okay.
So. See if I can do sharing, so I don't have to think about that.
as Mark brings that up, just, a reminder, we sent around a written proposal, from this group that, kind of filled out our template. So we're gonna hear from them, summarizing what's in there, and, I think the purpose of this is to give them some feedback. If there are any actions that we need to vote on coming out of this, like if we want, to move forward with some kind of funded research or background work, right, that's possible, of course, and the goal, is, I think, to give them feedback such that, this is, a proposal that could be brought to a vote at a future meeting to see if it's something that we want to kind of move to our next step, which is
So,
to
yeah.
evaluate it according to our criteria.
Exactly. So what I would think is at some point, if we approve of this one, that becomes this committee's proposal, then there'll be 2 other votes on 2 other proposals or whatever, how many you put in front of us.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right,
Right.
yeah, and by way of that, so what you're about to see is. A summarization of the meat of the proposal. What we're not going to cover is the work we've done so far on looking at how this might apply to the criteria. I think that's important because it's the next step. I think we're looking for direction and comments. This is designed to be an expansion of what's gone on in the past, and as such, I think there's always room to take another step or put something into that plan. So we're looking for that sort of input as well. And In addition to that. Sorry. Yeah. In addition to that, there's definitely. An element of this is this proposal is about. Figuring out what the next steps is and sort of carving a path forward, so that's pretty important. So the key assumptions in here. We thought we'd state were the Warner's Pond. Is cherished by many. I was tempted to cross out west and just say Concord residents, because I think that's true and beyond, but certainly by many people. There is no imminent or catastrophic threat to the pond or the watershed, meaning if we don't do anything today, tomorrow, it's not really going to change. Although we do recognize that there are things that are changing, both the development around the pond as well as the condition of the water over time is changing, and so we recognize those things. There is further development of Juro Park. There's the issue of what's going to happen at MCI. There's what will happen with the water to the fisheries environment when Talbot Pond goes. We could certainly easily add to this list of things that are impacting the pond. There have been some substantial investments that have been made, particularly in the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail and Juro Park, which is really phase 1 construction is just opening now. And the dam reconstruction reaching back over the course of a decade or so can be also seen as fairly recent and substantial investment in the condition of the dam. And there are other projects and concerns that are competing for attention here. So the last point on the assumptions was that, it could be difficult to get the town to commit funds for one of the large scale projects that we're considering. So this could be a path that addresses that concern as well. So we think that there is time to carefully assess and plan actions for what's going to happen over the long term. We recommend that time be taken. We think that experimenting with an expanded management plan, using a management plan, developing that. And so the direction here is to take a step in developing that management plan. And one question, as I was thinking about how to talk about this, I think that the Warner's Pond Task Force probably has a role here in the sense that we could be the initiators of the revised management plan and take the first steps down that road and then hand it off to some of the stakeholders that we're about to talk about. Planning and coordination among the stakeholders is required. Hasn't happened to the extent that we're suggesting it should happen here. And that's how we can maximize the benefits that are reflected in the criteria that we're going to evaluate our plans on. So what is the approach? The approach is to follow a couple of fairly simple, but subtly challenging steps. One is, and we've struggled with this in this forum, to clarify and document what the jurisdictional boundaries are among town boards and departments. Who does what? Who's responsible for the water? Who's responsible for the recreation area? How does planning get done? The town has had some success in other areas, particularly housing and sustainability, in using a planning roundtable approach, which is essentially a forum that takes place. The housing roundtable takes place quarterly, but it could be on a longer or shorter schedule than that. It brings all of the stakeholders to the table, whether they might be town committees or departments, as well as external and community stakeholders who might have an interest in this. So we're suggesting that this could be led by the NRC. In reading the material that was submitted tonight for consideration later at this meeting, I was noticing that the CPC application by the Recreation Commission has a lot of the elements that we were suggesting might take place in this roundtable incorporated in it with a recreation focus. So, I don't think it's as important who actually owns this, is my personal opinion, not something that we as a group did. I should have mentioned, by the way, on the first chart I put by it. The participants in this group were David Owen, who I noticed joined online. Bert, Bill, myself, and Ann Clifford. Ann Clifford's not here, but she was the 5 people in this particular group. So that element of engaging community stakeholders, both across departments and the normal silos, is really the key to both planning and implementation. So we're looking to see that happen and have some outlines about how that might occur. And monitoring and tracking the environmental and recreation data. In other words, establish those baselines that we were looking for when we were examining the 2012 watershed management report, when we examined the alternatives analysis. We didn't have time to incorporate it here because we just happened the day before yesterday, but our group did meet with a representative from Bear Hill Pond, where they've been doing annual drawdown. And we got a sense of how they're looking at things like phosphorus and dissolved oxygen, and how they're monitoring that, both the aquatic and the fish species over time, to understand what's going on as they do that program. And, you know, they've got 20 years worth of data. And so when they talk about what they want to do on any given year, it's based off of that. And I think we would all recognize that we don't have quite as much of that as we would have hoped for when we came here. So this is saying, institutionalize what we want to know and then start collecting that over time. There we go. So the key elements are to monitor the pond and experiment with ways to reduce the invasive vegetation, enhance the variety of wildlife, the environment for wildlife, enhance the recreation potential, incorporate a wider level of community involvement, which is organized and sort of planned so that people know where to plug in and how and when, and look at what can be done to enhance both the sustainability of the current system as well as the resilience of the system in the face of climate change. In other words, change is going to continue to happen. So how do we manage the system associated with that? Our suggestion is that if we try this approach, it should be given a good chance to run at least 5 years. And the proposal specifically doesn't rule out, we're not studying dredging or dam removal. It may become apparent at some point that or a fish passage or some other capital intensive project, you know, you could even argue adding a boat launch or whatever, may make sense to do and could easily be incorporated as a project. But we just think that before trying some of these other things, it makes sense to really try, you know, in an organized and systematic way, attempt to manage it. Not that those things some things haven't been tried, it's just that we haven't really said in the same sort of way, we're gonna get on this path and organize how that path is going to be followed for a while. So in terms of scope and jurisdiction, we tried to take a stab at where some of the interests are and how one might partition those interests, to provide some clarity both to the community and to the people that need to execute on this plan with what they're doing. So we came up with 4 groups. The Natural Resources Commission, who has care and custody of the 77-acre pond and wetlands. The Select Board technically has care and custody of the Giroux property, but really that's delegated through the Recreation Commission as parkland and would be managed there. And Public Works, which has responsibility for the dam and those structures and managing the maintenance of that. And also recognizing that the Housing Authority has an interest as an abutter and a homeowner, you know, a property owner there, although we don't really say much more about that in our plan. So there's three basic areas that require implementation. So given those first three parties and that are responsible and have jurisdictional control over certain areas, we thought we'd outline some goals and for these areas, and this is where I think there's room for building. Pond management, Giroux Park recreation, and dam maintenance. In terms of pond management, the natural resources groups, that was good. No, I want to go back to here, back up a couple pages. There we go. The Natural Resources Commission has jurisdiction over the pond. It has a long history with the pond. And missing from this presentation, but in part of our discussion has been that there's definitely some value in documenting the history and making those efforts. So, assume that a sort of authoritative history of what has happened might be an artifact of this task force's work, or could be something that goes into the management plan. But in furtherance of the goal of addressing invasives, they could organize hand pulling of invasives, monitor the growth and spread of invasives and other environmental parameters that are important by either using consultants, other resources, or even a citizen science project. And continue research on methods to control the invasives and nuisance aquatics, including determining the feasibility and anticipate effectiveness of annual drawdown or diver assisted suction harvesting, which are known to be effective for certain situations. And based on our dialogue with the Bear Hill Pond person, some kind of evaluation of what that program might look like and it is specific to our pond seems warranted there. I'll let everyone else chime in around the table when I'm done. I'm hopefully not going to go too much longer. Clear the areas, again, under the natural resources initiatives would be to try to clear areas of water lilies and dense vegetation for better access to Scout Island or other areas of the pond. Raise the awareness of the pond and, looking at it and in the context of the Azabet River watershed, and engage active stewards. Something like the Trail Stewards program could also be initiated under the NRC's umbrella, giving community members or organizations the opportunity to, in an organized way, take on certain activities that might be attractive to them, whether it be maintenance of the shoreline or some other engagement. And again, this could be, these activities could extend both, inside the buffer area or outside in the immediate environment there. So there's lots of different areas, including caring for the pocket park and look for other invasive species, meaning not in the water. Finally, or the last few things are enhancing the boat launch areas, looking at how they might be improved, engaging in clear communications with the recreation department and around their ongoing plans. So that's really asking for that coordination, specifically department to department, as well as eventually or potentially looking at a FISP passage and whether or not that might make sense at some point in time, particularly when the Talbot's Mill Dam is removed. And finally, and probably most, every time I look at this, I want to move it to the top, convene at least annually the roundtable we were talking about with community stakeholders and other groups. In other words, take the leadership to make sure that there's a coordinated, Warner's Pond Task Force. One group that might be involved, for example, is West Concord Advisory Committee. They're involved in the master plan. Another group might be the MCI Advisory Board or whoever is subsequently involved in development of that property. So there's a lot of stakeholders that should be brought to the table to coordinate, to express their priorities. The next section deals with the specific responsibilities of the Recreation Commission and tend to focus on the park and recreation programs. So these activities would need to be balanced clearly with the NRC interests and what's permissible. But we're saying if what your interest is a recreation oriented program, then the Recreation Commission is in the lead in terms of developing programs that are supported by stakeholders and meet those requirements. Particularly when we start talking about MCI, we have an expectation that there may be additional land in the immediate vicinity. And so some kind of master planning that you know, prevents duplication or makes these complementary efforts would fall under their responsibilities. And engaging groups like the Friends of Warner's Pond or potentially other groups in for example, associated with the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail in the development of the facilities that constitute the park. And the last three in their area would be to collect baselines on recreational usage. We know from experience, and you know, White Pond's a good example, that there's a capacity element to recreation facilities, particularly passive recreation facilities, and understanding how they're used and how much usage they're getting can be important to assessing how well they're serving community needs, as well as understanding when they may be getting overutilized. There are areas in town where certain types of activities have become too popular, and that's led to issues. Finally, including, and I might just mention that the Recreation Department has is talking about their ongoing maintenance and operations plans for, they presented at the select board on Monday night with some of the evolution of that. And we're encouraging that they include Giroux Park. Their current plan actually is relatively silent on Giroux Park because it's just brand new and hasn't really even had a grand opening yet. But they should incorporate that in the normal course of events and provide input again for recreation on MCI conduct. And lastly, and probably in the most straightforward way, is the specific responsibilities of the Public Works Commission and the Public Works Department are really to maintain the dam through regular maintenance and inspection program, and to report on the expected life of the dam, its structures, and maintain at least a 10-year outlook, because dams don't last forever, as we know. So we want to have headlights into this, because this plan does assume that the dam stays put. We want to have headlights into how long is that good for and how much are we spending on it over time. And that is the highlights of what we're thinking about. Hopefully that frames fairly well what we're considering in our proposal. And I look forward to your comments, questions.
But first of all, big thank you to
Yeah.
Mark and the group. Really. Thank you. So we want to open it up for Q&A, for feedback. One thing I do just want to note is our timing is a little bit funky today because we wanted to do this first thing because Mark is on a ticking clock for the meeting today. But we do have our fisheries expert who's scheduled to come at 5:45. So I just want to say, well, we can have a Q&A and discussion and go to 5:45. And if we need to return to that after the fisheries discussion, we can do that. Okay. But in any case, with that, let's open it up for questions to this group. Feedback, things you'd like to see more of or different. Yeah, go ahead, Malcolm.
Obviously, the group has done a lot of work and thinking on it, but somehow or other, your definition of no action is completely different to mine.
Yeah.
This is not a no action
That's true.
proposal. This is a very active proposal
Yeah.
to maintain the pond, and I would really like to hear what happens to the pond if we take no action? So you haven't, for me, answered any
Yeah,
questions.
that of course is a question that we don't really know the answer to.
But
And
that's
we-
what you're supposed to be working on, is it not?
Well,
I mean, we're supposed to be looking at taking the dam down, and we don't know exactly what it's gonna look like, but we're trying, doing the best we can to guess.
Malcolm, I think it was a misunderstanding, for us, miscommunication, because I, for one, thought that the other two committees were looking at the largest possible, events for the pond, the dam removal and dredging. And so everything else was left there for us to look at. And that's how I took it, that we were gonna look at the, what was left. So essentially meant no action towards dam removal and no action towards dredging. And so that's how we've been operating. We've been playing with names. We actually thought a couple times of changing the name of our group, but we'd like to, we even called ourselves the Do Nothing Committee, but even that didn't make, I mean, we're just being playful there. But I think for us, generally, our notion was, we're gonna expand on the present, we're gonna do what we can and see what develops, without doing any major actions.
yeah, I would add to that in the sense that what we were really trying to address is the status quo. And I think one of the reasons why we're here today is because the status quo is never really that static. And so we need to recognize that change is happening, change always happens. And so what do we do in the normal course of events when we have a recreation facility, when we have a natural resource? And how do we make sure that those activities and responsibilities are as clearly defined as possible? So we were trying to address things that we could recognize as being fairly clear shortcomings in what's happening today and what has led to the situation that we're in at the moment. So we didn't want it to be just what happens if you sit there and wait. I mean, we have even responsibilities. For example, you can't just stop maintaining the dam. That's not an option. So the question is, how does that get done? And we've heard that those things are going to happen.
Yeah,
Can you just what, Vicky, I want to get to, just want to check with Malcolm. I want to see if I can maybe take your, your critique and turn it into
Well,
maybe a.
obviously, I have had a different assumption
Great.
about what the committee is doing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been clarified for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just want to check, is part of what you're asking for here, from this group, or just from figuring out what we can do as a task force in general, is some kind of a forward look into what will the ecology, what will the situation look like if literally nothing is done from changing from the way things are being managed today? Is that, we also
I would-
misunderstanding, is there a request or an interest in that?
I would be very interested in knowing, obviously, the dam has to be maintained, that's
Mhm.
legal, and important for safety. But I would be very interested to know, how long does the pond have if we don't do anything? I think that's key in importance. I mean, if we sit around for another 5 years and think about it, will there be a pond still?
Yeah.
No, sorry.
And to be clear, we're not actually proposing sit around for 5 years and think about it. What we're proposing is, given the tools that have been tried before and some of the ones that have yet to be tried, like drawdown or driver assisted, suction, a diver assisted suction dash, what the last H is. Should there be attempts to do those things? Is it reasonable to do those mostly, I've always been inclined to call this the status quo. In other words, what happens if you're trying to maintain what's there without major changes is more of where I started from no action.
Right, it's just a
Yeah, I
difference.
see.
Yeah, I hear you.
Vicky and Jeff, so let's go to Vicky, then Jeff.
Yeah, so I'm quite impressed with this. I didn't know what to expect from this group, but I'm quite impressed with the thoroughness and thoughtfulness of what you researched and sort of dug into. I do think to me, what's happened is that you're treating it as a town resource, like Haywood Meadow or Barrett's Mill Farm, that we own, NRC owns this resource. And so what do we as a town, what responsibility do we bear, given that it is something that we have we own and we have paid for, and so what do we do with things that we own and paid for? So I really appreciate that it's treated the way that other large, open, recreational, natural resources within the town are treated, and so, and we have paid for many a study over the years to tell us what we're supposed to be doing with this pond, and it sort of digs into some of those and says, you told us we need to do this, we're going to do this way. You told us we should be looking at invasives and so let's continue to do that. So I like that it actually digs back and says, we already have some of this information. Let's be educated by what we already have paid for and move that forward. And let's just say when MCI comes along, which I like it's in here, we may think differently about dredging or dam removal. It still allows us to do things that are irreparable in the future, right? Because
Yeah.
we don't know what's going to happen when MCI comes along, or another 1,000 units of affordable housing get built in West Concord. What kind of pressures will that put
Exactly.
on the town and on West Concord? And when Route 2 moves and all those things, there will be new pressures, and we may think very differently about something we cannot go back on. So I just want to, I was
Yeah.
surprised how much I love your plan, so.
Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, just to Malcolm's point, I think for all of us, any of these options is going to include some town investment or request for town resources. So I think we should somehow, maybe extracting from existing reports or relying on some of us or EA or somebody articulate what is the true no action future that we want to avoid, I think. A couple reactions. I agree with Vicky, great work by the group. The first or second slide, Mark, the assumptions doesn't include sort of I think the opening comment for the alternatives analysis that the current situation is not desirable, right? Right. Sort of
Yeah.
is in a suboptimal condition.
That's actually in the long form of the
Okay.
report.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I-
Yeah.
You guys have a short form and a long form?
Yeah, long form.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
I wasn't
that's
gonna read 12 pages.
No.
Yeah. And then-
It's been distributed, right?
Yeah,
It's in there, but yeah, the statement that, eutrophication, for example, is going on and is expected to continue to go on.
Yeah.
Is definitely in there.
And then when, as we all need to get to some spitballing of costs, will you, I guess I'd request that you include the true cost of
Mhm.
town staff time.
Yeah.
And not,
Mhm.
it's too easy for us to think like, oh, yeah, the staff will take care of this, it's already on their plate.
Which is gonna show up in probably all of these,
Yeah.
some like
Right,
mowing
yeah.
or whatever, or some
Yeah.
dam maintenance, all those will show up repeatedly, so it'd be great to.
Yeah, there's some
Use-
baseline budgeting that could be developed, and we can pull that out.
No.
And then final question, for Delia and Bert, the sort of White Pond is also a NRC Recreation Department collaboration at all?
Yeah, well,
I mean, it's interface.
it is interface, that's
Yeah.
right. So it's a little different, that, the swim beach doesn't touch the Sachem's Cove area,
And that's the part you guys.
which is what we manage, and that's both municipal as well as conservation.
So
land.
being a great pond, it's sort of a no man's land, no person's land almost.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
got it.
it's owned by the state, but, other than stopping biannually. And occasional, I don't
Right.
remember the last fisheries testing that was done there.
So I was just thinking if that was the case, but I'm wrong, there sort of would exist this forum, or, I mean, that could fold into this,
Isn't
but
the-
it could easily be developed.
Isn't the APOD budget in the NRC,
I'm sorry,
the cost for the APOD?
Yeah, we're doing the APOD, we're doing the
Yes.
APOD on.
we are doing the APOD,
Yeah.
On White Pond.
right,
So that's a version of active management of water quality that's going on in another pond, even though the town doesn't actually own the pond, but it's happening anyway,
right.
yeah.
Because the approach for that was because of the challenges that the town was experiencing for its resources.
Yeah,
At the swim beach, with the
Right.
pond being closed
yeah,
for cyanobacteria, so,
yeah, I'm just, sort of to the general point that there is a base, if you really wanted to roll up a budget for what is the town spending on White Pond, you would have to include activities like that.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it's gonna be a varied list by resource.
Great, so I see Liz and Keith. Go ahead, Liz.
So this is kind of following off of Jeff's question about sort of financial pieces of it. Because you sort of have NRC as like experimenting with this stuff, so when you think about the budgeting piece, and you're thinking about kind of like, here's like this set chunk of money that will be like able to like be used for like, let's try a drawdown this year, like, because
Yeah.
that, you know, if we're encouraging to try different methodologies, we need to make sure we fund that encouragement.
Yeah, as a, for example, what they told us about Bear Hill was they did a gravity-based drawdown of about 2 feet the first time they tried it,
Mhm.
2.5 feet, so relatively low cost. Because, you know, and over the years, they, you know, tried more aggressive, based on the results, they tried to get deeper and deeper until finally they literally built a pump that allows them to pump the pond out to get to whatever is.
About 5.5 to 6 feet.
Yeah,
Now we say pump it out, it doesn't, you know, it just lowered it, you know, it's not the whole pond, right? It just lowers it by that amount.
yeah, but, you know, and some of that was based on the results they were getting, and clearly that kind of operation
Yes.
cost more
Yeah.
over time, so the question is, and we don't have this answer, but if what we clearly got was look at a pond engineering firm, and by the way, in the back of the section, we have a couple of alternatives for how we might begin to address that. Whether we might ask EA as one of their alternative analysis to look at that, or seek a different pond management company to give us some advice on that. But the thinking is that if, you know, to pursue that, understand both what might be a reasonable place to start with that, and then try it. There's a lot of unknown answers. The bathymetry of the pond's not as understood as we'd like it to be. Obviously, if you draw it down, you can look at it, see it at some level. So there's some information to be gleaned in those ways. So those programs can be kind of dialed up and down in terms of what one might spend.
So just to comment on that aspect of it, it would be, I think, challenging to permit a drawdown as an experiment.
Yeah.
In order to, I mean, you could do a drawdown study
Yeah.
to understand how well it would work,
Right,
but to go straight into doing getting a permit for a drawdown,
Yeah.
I don't, unless you can show that there wouldn't be any impacts, and drawdowns do have impacts, I think it
Yeah.
would, you know, you have to show that there's a reason for it to be done, and
Right.
having it as, you know, experimental, so I just want to be sure that people kind of
Yeah.
understand that aspect of it.
So, yeah, by saying experimental, we're probably overstating it. What they did at Bear Hill, right, is they specifically applied for a permit to draw down, but a very low level at first. Because they wanted to find out the results, because they weren't exactly sure and they wanted also to monitor the effect on wildlife, et cetera. And that's where the fisheries and the wildlife and fisheries was interested in what was going on, as they did that. So they were very careful over those 20 years to monitor, and as they found more and more data, they started to draw down more, as they found out that was effective. For them, by the way, just to say this, what was most effective for them was its effect on milfoil and, was it fanwort? And they also were, this surprised them too, I think, at least the way Bruce presented it, the chair of their commission. He said, not, because fanwort and milfoil does not drop seeds. So when that hit, and the ice and the cold weather hit, it pretty much wiped it out, and it gave room for natural plants to grow, which was also kind of a surprise to them that began to happen. But he also said, interestingly, when their pump broke in the past year or so, how quickly things returned. So they've had to do a drawdown every year. Yeah, bad things return.
Yeah.
So they had to keep it up.
Although their longitudinal data does show some benefits to the native species of,
Yes.
of plants over time as they've done this fairly consistently, which was something that, you know, it wasn't exactly clear to them that was going to happen. It just, when again, they're tracking 10 or 12 different species of aquatic plants and, you know, on a regular basis and taking a look at what their coverage is every year. So it's an interesting lesson in what you can do if you put your mind to paying attention to these things.
It was very scientific.
And they've been working with someone from Corps of Engineers. Who was it? Wendy?
Wendy Jenner.
Yes,
Thank you.
Yeah.
She has a little side gig.
that's right. So she's been monitoring them,
Yeah.
working to monitor the pond for these years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wanna get to Keith. I do just wanna check back in with Delia. Hearing Bill sort of explain that they're thinking about this sort of similar to Bear Hill, not sort of framing it as an experiment, but as sort of something that they'd be trying to achieve a result for, but also
But to do it
monitoring,
modestly.
potentially changing over time. Does
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
address the concerns around permitting, or you still think that's likely to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think you would just need to show in
Mhm.
that first application that there is going to be a benefit from the act.
Yeah, to be
in
clear,
order
the
to receive
recommend,
permit.
the
Yeah.
recommendation was do some kind of feasibility study and then design a program and apply
Yeah.
for it. So, well, I keep on suggesting, we would learn. Maybe it would do exactly what's expected, or maybe it wouldn't.
Mhm. Great. I see Malcolm, but Keith's been waiting, so I'll go to you then.
Yeah,
Sorry,
No worries.
just was gonna repeat what was already said, and just that, I thought the proposal and elements in it were actually quite thorough, and there's definitely things in there that I wasn't expecting. So I thought it was really great, but I wanted to just highlight, I really like the idea of having some kind of annual roundtable
Yeah.
check-in with the town through the NRC. I think that works both ways, that
Mhm.
the town get updates,
Yeah.
and then the town can receive input from the community. I think that's like an excellent idea.
Yeah.
Thank you for including that.
Yeah, Malcolm, go ahead.
So, given what you're proposing, what, it feels to me as though this is really just an extension of the task force's mandate.
Well,
So why
Yeah.
wouldn't then the task force simply continue to oversee this sort of extended period of consultation and evaluation with some implementation?
I think that this, what I alluded to kind of at the top, as I was thinking about it, there's definitely some value in sort of jump starting a process. But I think as Vicky was pointing out, this is not very far away from how the town is managing other initiatives and priorities. You know, to achieve sustainability or to have enough housing, you know, both affordable and workforce housing and other types of housing to meet our community's needs. So we were reluctant to create a situation where we're just saying, oh, another committee that exists off by itself with a mandate will solve this. But we also recognize that you could create the conditions for an ongoing process or program, which could then be reasonably adopted and is in the purview and is not very far away from what these groups do now. You know, the Recreation Commission just completed a strategic plan and reading through their CPC application, you can see that they're referencing those kinds of initiatives in there. And so all we're saying is bring together an occasional focus, a symposium or forum or whatever you want to call it, but bring that together and do that with some regularity so that people know this is the place to go if they want to sort of understand all these things. And I think drawing a boundary around it, you know, drawing the right boundary around it, is this really a West Concord initiative, or is this, you know, really just a recreation slash NRC initiative, or is it, you know, are there are other elements that make sense to it? The good thing about having such a forum is that anybody that's interested can go and they can throw in their 2 cents when they do, and that happens all the time when we talk housing or something else.
Honestly, one more thing about this too, not about that, but it's tied in. It is true, when you institutionalize these kind of things into present well-established, committees, et cetera, they tend to work better in my experience. But the second thing I wanted to say, which kind of excites me and it ties in a little bit, is the idea of a stewardship program similar to what we have with trail stewards.
Yeah.
Because I'm on the Trails Committee and we meet every month and people will tell us about things that we hadn't seen out there in the various trails. And what needs to be repaired right away, what needs to be put off, and that happens every month. And that's been fascinating for me. And so if something similarly developed around the pond, as pond stewards, that could be
Yeah.
really good.
Great, so I want to give Vicky the last question before we invite our fisheries expert
Oh,
in,
sorry.
and then we'll
Yeah.
definitely
Thank you.
come back to this discussion, since it seems like we're still going strong.
Yeah,
Go
so I
ahead,
think
Vicky.
that this idea of the committee is something we should take up, I think it's gonna be a longer discussion. I don't know that this group is really the right group at the end of the day to own, like,
Mhm.
how to do the invasives and how to do the management
Yeah.
and how to, all of those things. Although this group has learned a lot, I would hate for a new group to walk in and have to learn what we've learned.
Mhm.
But, it feels to me like there might be a consultant that does come in, like pond management consultant who we would give them the mission and the vision to say, this is our goal, whatever this is going to be, and they would report back periodically to either this group or an interested group, however, or stewardship group.
Sure.
So that, we could do check-ins, but, I don't know that this group needs to continue on for,
Yeah.
5 years,
Right.
overseeing
I think
this
so. I was gonna do with
expertise.
that,
Yeah, yeah.
I was thinking more along the lines of, one of our public forums is where the task force, essentially when we're presenting our final report, could be the first of those round.
Yeah,
Sure.
that's right.
And
That's
the
right.
task force could exist as a participant in that round table with the ownership of
Yeah.
of that then reverting back to the NRC or whoever. So it seems like there's, that to be a good forum for a handoff that says, this is what we learned, here's the expertise we gathered, here are the things that still need work, need to be done, need to be funded, whatever they are. These are the investigations that we recommend doing, and now you have it.
And if I could just add, I think this resource is a Concord resource. It's not a West
Yeah,
Concord resource.
sure.
We see
All right.
kids riding their bikes from all over the place.
Yeah.
It's not people walking from, within a quarter of a mile of.
Yeah.
It's actually more of a regional resource. We see
It
people
is.
out there from other towns all the time.
There's gonna be more of that now that Bruce Freeman's.
Well, yeah, you see Acton, Maynard. for example.
Right.
Definitely.
And, I think that one of the things, and I might recommend this just in terms of process, is this particular document spent at least a week with almost every member of our group
Mhm.
and revised and, you could see the imprint of that. And, I sort of started that and then got it back, or Bill started it, and it came around to me for the second time, and I was surprised at how different it looked and felt, and so, for those of you that are thinking about doing this, to take advantage of that idea
Awesome.
when you work in your project.
Great, thanks, Mark, that's helpful. So we'll come back and talk more about this, as needed. It sounds like we might be losing Mark, but we have other members of the group
6
here.
o'clock I've got some.
Yeah, but Mark, thank you so much for coming and joining and sharing the presentation and answering questions.
Yeah, thanks for accommodating the schedule. Sorry, I have to.
No worries. One thing, we're gonna hand it over to, I can hand it over to Rachel to introduce our fisheries expert in just a minute. One thing I do just want to note, it's interesting listening to this presentation. I can imagine that there are, some ideas that will come out of these presentations that we as a group decide, like, no matter which major alternative we go with, we want to do something like that. This is just a good idea, no matter what happens, right? So it might be some of the ideas from this presentation, there might be some in others, and I just want to, like, that's great. That's a part of why we're doing this and having you all think creatively about how to move forward. So anyway, with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Rachel to introduce our fisheries expert.
Let's,
Yes, there we go.
Stephen, are you there?
I am. Can y'all hear me and see me?
Yes. So the next presenter here is Stephen Maddox, who is the Aquatic Connectivity and Fisheries Outreach Biologist for the Mass Division of Fisheries and Wildlife. And he has kindly agreed to come tonight to talk a little bit about fisheries in Warner's Pond and Neshoba Brook, and to answer any questions that he has. take it away, Stephen, or if you want to say anything more about yourself, feel free.
Yeah, I'll just briefly introduce myself. Thank you for that, Rachel. I'm out of our Fish and Wildlife Headquarters office in Westboro. I've been with the agency Fish and Wildlife for about 8 years. I did my graduate work at UMass Amherst, studying migratory fish and historical populations. Worked in several states across the country, but like I said, been here 8 years, and I'm now my focus really is migratory fish and aquatic habitat restoration. I work more so in the Connecticut River Valley, but really all over the state. So I don't have a presentation prepared or anything formal. I'm kind of looking over the data now, and I've been reviewing some of the documents that are relevant to this watershed and this project. So I can talk about that a little bit. So yeah, I mean, should I just go ahead and kind of give a little bit more background about the area, or?
Sure.
Yes, I think it'd be helpful if you just talked about some of the information that you've looked at and talk about that, and then let the group ask their questions.
Okay, yeah, so, the Concord River is a really important main stem river for anadromous fish, which there's several of them in the area. And really anadromous fish, by that I mean fish that migrate between fresh and salt water. Most of them are born in freshwater, migrate out to the ocean, and then come back and return every year. And, in colonial times, they were returned in huge numbers, and there's festivals, and they have a rich heritage, or a rich meaning in the culture of Native Americans and, Europeans for the past 400 years. And really, most of the species populations have significantly declined due to dams and water pollution and stuff. So a lot of these fish need help, and that's kind of my job, is to figure out where are the best places to make that happen. Obviously, there's dams everywhere. The Lawrence Dam on the main stem of the Merrimack, that's the big one. River herring aren't doing too well down there, but they kind of ebb and flow a little bit. They are making their way up the Concord in small numbers, as well as shad would be expected to seen there too. American eel, sea lamprey. So the Concord is pretty large river. The first dam, the Middlesex Dam's breached. The second dam, Centennial, has a fishway. The third dam, Talbot Mills, we're hoping will be removed in the next several years. Dam removal is happening in a lot of places, and it's really kind of picked up momentum. So that gives us great hope. These fish are pretty resilient. When you remove dams, they do return. They have specific life history characteristics that allow them to do that. Most of them return to the exact waters they were born or spawned in, but a small percentage of them stray to new habitats. So they're constantly able to find new, openly accessible, suitable spawning habitats. And that's kind of makes them resilient. So when barriers come down, it helps. And so when I look at a pond like Warner's Pond, I'm not familiar with it. I've probably been there through my field work, but it's not really ringing a bell. It's a small impoundment. It looks like it's got a lot of aquatic vegetation from the aerial imagery. It looks like it's probably filled in, and the impoundment's been blocking flow for probably a couple centuries. You guys could probably tell me that better though. So it's certainly aged out in one regard. Upstream of that, there is a fair amount of open habitat. The stream is fairly a good size in terms of suitability for species like river herring, eel, sea lamprey, and especially American shad. The species I'm most concerned about that need help are river herring, which are alewife and blueback herring, but also American shad. River herring were listed federally as a species of concern back in 2006. So there's a coast-wide Atlantic coast moratorium on it. You can't harvest them anymore. You can't even commercially fish for them. Shad, there's a small commercial fishery for them, but they're at an all-time low. They need help as well. They're just a little bit bigger. They prefer bigger water and spawn in the main stem of the medium rivers or large rivers. Alewife like to go up these rivers and spawn in like impoundments and even side channels and slower moving water. So in this watershed, I'm looking for kind of impoundments. And I see a few upstream of the Warner's Pond Dam. So it looks like there is suitable habitat upstream. You know, the big question that came up for me was it's the Erickson Dam, I believe, on Route 27 that impounds Fort Brook Pond. I wondered if they could get by that. I can't tell from the imagery or the Google Street View, but upstream of that, there's quite a bit more stream habitat up Fort Pond Brook. So I don't know the status of that one. That would be something to consider if that was passable or, you know, could be improved upon. I think that would give me more incentive to want to consider an improvement at Warner's Pond. If you look up Neshoba Brook, the other side, you know, there's Ice House Pond Dam right there. So there's not a whole lot of open habitat that would be opened up on Neshoba Brook. And again, if that dam could be circumnavigated by some kind of a nature like fishway or a simple fish ladder, that could open up a fair bit more of habitat. So those are the two impoundments upstream that caught my eye. I think if they were still staying, it's still a help to the species. I would certainly expect if that dam were to be removed or if it were to have, a really good fishway that actually worked. That's the thing about fishways. You have to make sure they work. There's a lot of engineering that needs to go into them. The attraction flow needs to be just right. The location of the entrance needs to be at the right level. I would expect fish to use it. Certainly right after the Talbot Mills Dam was removed. I would expect eel are already up there, so that's not an issue, but it's river herring and shad. Some people might not think American shad could use this river because some of the criteria listed by the federal wildlife service is like 4-foot depth minimum. But that's a little bit conservative. Really, they're calling for 2 times the body height of shad, and they're about 8 inches height. So really, we see them go through skinny water, and they're moving up there during spring high flow. So we do see shad trying to spawn in medium-sized rivers about the size of Neshoba and Fort Pond Brook. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I look at this project and I think it does have potential to help many fish. I've talked about the anadromous fish, but some resident fish like white suckers that move a lot through freshwater systems. It would benefit too. Creek chub suckers, shiners. These fish also move through freshwater annually. So I do expect it to help fish movement, especially with things like climate change. That's always a topic for us, is we want to allow fish to move where the cool water is or where the warmer water is that's more suitable for their current time of year. We do have a cold water fishery just upstream of Warner's Pond, an unnamed trib to Neshoba Brook, and that just means we have brook trout there. Brook trout typically benefit from dam removals because, when dams impound water, they increase the sun exposure. You're increasing the surface area. So the impoundment typically warms, and that affects it downstream as well. That trib's far enough upstream, it may not really impact it that much. It depends on how deep Warner's Pond is. Sometimes ponds do serve as a refuge for cold water fish if they hold cool water in the summer. I'm looking at it, I don't think it's that deep. I'm guessing it's less than 10 feet, maybe. But anyway, yeah, right now Warner's Pond has warm water fish, like largemouth bass, perch, smallmouth bass. I've got the data here, bluegill, pumpkin seed, shiners. I would expect that to transition to more riverine species if that was removed. You'd still get some resident fish, like I said, like white suckers and banded sunfish, creek chub suckers, shiners. But I would expect these migratory fish to use that system. Sorry if I just rambled. Hopefully that some of that made sense.
It's good.
Any questions for Stephen?
Steve, I have a
Yeah.
question. It has to do with the Merrimack River and the fish passages. I've heard that they don't really work on them, they aren't really working very well in the Merrimack River. Is that true?
Yeah, I'd say that's fair.
Okay.
And there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, the relicensing process for the main stem dams are, the license period is 30 to 50 years, so a lot of it's old. It takes a long time to have improvements done. I mean, those rivers are kind of different, in a different ballpark than something like this. But yeah, that's something that the state and the federal agencies are constantly working on, improving those fishways, and it's frustrating because, from my perspective, I'm a public employee. I'm trying to, do the best I can to represent the people, and it's frustrating to have, a company kind of hold a river hostage in a way. I mean, they do provide a service, I get it, but I always kind of fall back to the river herring and these fish that we're concerned about. Some people say, well, they're just fish. Well, they basically feed the entire ocean ecosystem of the fish I like to eat. I'm a big seafood fan. I like cod, haddock, mahi. And these are the fish that are going back and filling the bellies of those. So I think, trying to tie it and relate it to people is important. But yeah, basically they don't work that well. The ones in the Connecticut, the Holyoke fish lift works fairly well. So fish lifts are generally an improvement. It doesn't make sense when you think about it, but it actually does work. It's like a giant fish elevator. It brings the fish up. But the Connecticut does have problems too. The Turner's Falls works terribly. We're under relicensing now with them. We're asking for some big improvements. So I do have hope. It just takes time.
Follow-up question? Are there fish passages which you, considering our dam, are there fish passages which you think could work on that dam?
I mean, I'm really not an engineer. I'm not the best person to ask that.
Yeah.
I did see photos of it, and I saw that it wasn't that high. And I saw that there was not a lot of infrastructure right beside it, which made me think there's probably room to put something that would work. Again, the considerations are, where does the entrance go? How steep is it? It looks like the dam's not too high, so the grade wouldn't have to be crazy. And then I don't know what your water level fluctuations are like, because the fish are going to be moving up in the spring, really from like April to river herring move in April, shad move in like early to mid-May, lamprey move with shad. So that's your high flow season. So there is some forgiveness there. Fish like water, they're attracted to the flow. But you'd have to ask an engineer. I'm sure some could give you some quotes, but and then Brad Chase probably has more experience. DMF, they do a lot more of that. We're just kind of getting into it, but we don't have the capacity or the history to know those things.
Okay.
Other questions from the task force?
Well, you might be interested to know, we have a letter from Brad Chase, so I don't
Yes,
know if that.
I sent it to you.
Okay, good.
Yes, Liz.
I have, feels like a silly question. I can ask it anyway. So beaver dam, so like I'm under the understanding that a beaver dam doesn't really matter for a fish because I'm guessing because there's holy. I just want to like confirm that I'm understanding that correctly and like, what are the impacts of beaver dams on fish movements? Stuff like that, because obviously, like, we know we have some, they happen, so like, as we talk about it, I want to be able to be like, okay, yeah. So we have them, this is what that means for us.
Yeah, I mean, beaver dams can block fish passage, so it can be an issue. We see that on the Parker River. It's blocked river herring passage to a few, to Pentucket Pond and Rock Pond for a while. But generally they're not permanent structures. They wash out every several years, or if not decade. And usually, like you said, there's some kind of breach somewhere at some point. So fish use them. Now the double-edged sword of that is river herring spawn and produce the nursery habitat is in impoundment. So if they can get around the beaver dam, that's perfect. I mean, that's what we're starting to think. New England used to be. Like we picture it kind of this rocky, beautiful waterfall, landscape before, modern industry came. But I think some research has shown that it was a lot of just wetlands and beaver dams and just, really unique dynamic rivers that were connected. And that makes sense for a species like river herring. So, long answer short, yes, they're a problem, excuse me. But it's not like a permanent concrete structure that's been there for 200 years.
So it could be a problem, but could also be like a boom or.
So
Maybe
maybe,
not, or maybe-
another, two questions. Sure. One is, you said that, it takes a while for fish to relearn, to come back and spawn. And so we've had a dam here. I saw in EA's newest the design report since 1819 is the date that they have published now. So I'm just curious.
1850s.
What's that, sorry?
1850s.
In the report we just got today, it says 1819, so that there was a dam, a
So
dam
there was a
there.
previous
Mhm.
dam there.
Yeah, it said
Yeah,
for
okay.
the lead or whatever it was.
Okay.
It's in the new
Yeah.
report.
Okay,
So I'm curious if it's been there 1819 or 1850s, 1880s, whatever. It's a long, long time. It feels like. What does that mean to be, they relearn or they come and, spawn over time, they relearn their paths, one. And two, you talked about this Brad Chase's, involvement, and if there is a report, do we all have that report or
a
that letter?
yeah,
We all have that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So maybe the first, only one question.
Yeah, they don't have to like relearn anything. They just will basically branch out to new habitats. And we see dam removals happening like in Maine and all across the East Coast. And literally the next year we see like, hundreds and thousands of fish showing up. That's a larger river. At this scale, I wouldn't expect that. I would expect a few dozen and then maybe the order of magnitude, like hundreds or something, probably not several thousand, at least right away. Because this is generally a fairly small system, but yeah, fish come back right away. And it's just set memory. So when they're in that nursery habitat, when they're juveniles, they basically imprint on the exact water chemistry of that location, which is slightly different than the next tributary, nearby. And they imprint that on their actual physical structure on their bones. And then when they come back, they can 3 to 5 years later, generally they know exactly where to go. Which is cool because it tells them, hey, it was successful here. I'm going to go here again. So it's kind of unique. I would expect it to happen pretty quick. Again, it depends on the Talbot Mills Dam. And also you'd have to temper your expectations based on the watershed size. And again, those 2 impoundments upstream, I think would help a lot. But I'm looking at Fort Pond Brook, and it's a meandering system with a lot of wetlands. I think that's pretty favorable. Yeah. So, again, river herring they need all the help they can get. I know this is a lot of other things to consider with this project. So, it's hard to say, but.
Chris, do you wanna go?
I do. I have another question where the dam is in Warner's Pond, where the dam flows over downstream, there's like a pond. So kind of like you talked about areas where fish will spawn in different ponds, or impoundment areas. Would that be a suitable place for fish to spawn? And would it be helpful was that a good thing? And if we were to have a fish ladder, would that also help to fish to pass plus have a place to spawn? Is that realistic or is that my optimism?
Are you saying, do they spawn below the dam? Between?
Right.
Yeah, there's an impoundment right at the bottom. of
That's
the dam,
what do they call it? The settling basin or something?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
right.
basin, yeah, let's call it a basin.
Right below the dam
It's like
itself.
100 feet across or something.
Yeah. I don't know how deep it is though.
It's not very deep.
Yeah, 'cause you were saying 4,
Probably
10 feet or
about
something.
4 feet deep, maybe. It can be less when the
Well,
water's.
in water, they would be attracted to it. And sometimes, especially shad, they will spawn over like riffles, and herring will even spawn on the shoreline of lakes. So if it's riffly and has flowing water, that's generally good. So yeah, I could see them using it. It's hard to say without seeing it though.
Sure.
I'm having trouble imagining what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, it's right where the dam flows, so it flows into that area. And then it comes around, it kind of comes straight down, and then it turns and flows away from there. And then under the road, actually, and continues on down to Shovel Brook.
So it is moving water.
It is moving water for the most part. I mean, it's a little stagnant right now,
Right.
but, you know, but when the water's high, that's moving.
Yeah, that could be a good spawning area. I mean, they need flowing water to kind of keep the eggs oxygenated. So I can certainly see that being used.
Jeff, did you have another question?
Oh, I can wait. Bye, Jack.
Oh, thanks. Stephen, we've had some questions about sort of the effect of periods of low water in our streams. Can you tell us a little bit about the annual life cycle of some of these fish, the freshwater or the anadromous, and how these late summer low flow periods affect that, or they deal with that because they're doing a different thing at that time of year?
Yeah, normally that low flow is or low water levels in the summer is usually more of a concern for species like native brook trout or common resident fish. The migratory fish that they usually come in during high flow during the spring, and the adults typically out migrate like within a month. We do run into problems sometimes where the juveniles are in the nursery habitat, like alewife, for example, are in impoundments or small ponds, and there's not enough water in some of these ponds in August. There's actually no outflow. So the river herring are stuck in there until either a big rain event, or they just become a landlocked population, which happens sometimes. Sometimes they're not successful. They only exist in, a couple dozen ponds in the state where they actually are successfully reproducing. But they're good at, out migrating in pulses. So they'll probably wait for a big rain event in the fall and then go out there. But yeah, I mean, drought is certainly a concern. It's hard to know without knowing the groundwater, the groundwater inputs in different areas of these streams. I don't know how much is surface water. I do see some small ponds, and the wetlands, will help recharge or keep the rivers charged. But I wouldn't expect low water to have a major impact on their life cycle, other than just the juveniles. Are they able to leave? But now, if most of this spawning habitat is going to be constrained to the main stem of the rivers, like Fort Pond Brook and then Neshoba, I wouldn't worry about that because they're in the river. When they feel it getting low or when the time's right, they'll out migrate. Usually it's temperature cues.
Thanks. Then Bill had a follow-up.
Oh, sure. Please.
Might be a separate, sorry. So Stephen, more broadly, we're obviously talking about fish. There's a lot of interest in anadromous fish. You're the aquatic connectivity specialist. So can you tell us briefly about other benefits of aquatic connectivity to stream ecology? And, if we could get hung up on the fact that, there's the Dan and Lawrence that doesn't let these fish pass, but there are other benefits to aquatic habitat connectivity, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, in terms of like flushing impoundments, I mean, that's one. I mean, we get calls all the time. People are like, I have vegetation in my pond. I'm like, well, it's had a dam for 200 years. It needs to be flushed. I mean, that's pretty blunt, but if you think about it, it's just the sediment's just being trapped there. So one benefit is kind of resetting the system, all that sediment that's been trapped there. And as I mentioned earlier, it does reduce stream temperatures, which is important for resident fish. We're seeing average temperatures increase from recent trends, and that, to the best of our knowledge, it's going to continue to increase, slowly, but over time. So that'll help. Again, with resiliency to changing conditions and droughts. We want to have organisms be able to move up and down. River, I've already kind of touched on that a little bit. Organisms that don't move so well, like mussels. There's probably some mussels in the Assabet. I haven't looked at our data, but I'm sure there's a few, as well as the Concord. They rely on fish to move their juveniles up and downstream, and they're kind of stuck unless the fish are able to move. So that's a big nexus with restoration efforts. Is some of these mussel species, they don't have successful year classes for like 20 years because the fish just aren't able to move. And that's a whole nother topic we could talk about. I could get an expert to connect with you guys. They have certain host species. But mussels are important. They filter water. They're a good indicator of river health. I think you guys chatted on aquatic vegetation too. So, and just restoring it, what I always think about is restoring it to the natural condition it was in. I'm a big fan of recreation and, lakes and stuff and fishing, and a big advocate for those things. And some dams make sense to keep and some dams don't. So I think it's just about the balance of the actual use and the benefits you get. I think those are the main ones. I think, fish species benefits, temperature. You'll probably get some less nutrients from letting the nutrients kind of flow out, less vegetation. So that's what I would expect to happen.
Thanks.
Bill,
Oh, one last question for me anyway. Do you stock any herring type species in waterways?
We don't, as an agency. Marine Fisheries and New Hampshire do truck some river herring to habitat that's unavailable to kind of help keep the population going. DMS, Marine Fisheries stocks them, I think maybe a dozen or so lakes to kind of help get them going, alewife in particular. So that's something that, I'm sure they would at least consider or talk about, but it only makes sense in certain situations. Obviously the best way is to not need to do that and to have access, but they probably wouldn't stock fish where there wasn't access unless there was some kind of research going on or some specific need. But yeah, that's a thing. It does happen.
Okay.
any other questions from the task force?
Super interesting.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Stephen, thank you.
Stephen.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Stephen.
Very much.
Thank y'all for having
Thank
me.
you.
Okay,
Back to you.
all right. Thanks, Rachel. I can give my hands a rest.
Yeah.
Okay, so, I do just want to note, I see a member of the public with your hand raised, so we'll be taking public comments another round towards the end, if you want to speak then. But for now, we're keeping it with the task force. Okay, so to return to our conversation, so, another 180 turn, maybe I can just share a screen. I was taking some notes here. And so these are some of the items. That's understanding the right thing. No, so this one. Yeah, there we go. So these are just some of the reactions that came out of our conversation, just to remind you all of where we were. We heard some interest in understanding the trajectory of, actual no action, including without additional town or other resources being involved. We heard appreciation of treating the pond as a resource, appreciation that this alternative leaves open future possibilities, a suggestion that it could be helpful to articulate costs, including, what kind of funding would be needed for the different pond management activities that are suggested, town staff time for the various approaches that are in there. I note that it could be difficult to permit drawdown as an experiment, but we've had back and forth on that around, and if clear benefits are articulated, then it's likely a different story. And then appreciation for the idea of a roundtable. And then I just noted as we were going along, like some of the potential unanswered questions that, you know, this group at some point might want to see if we can answer, or might just agree and decide we can't answer those in the time that we have. But you know, can we clarify some of those costs around management actions, or clarify, or at least get some kind of general maybe sense of the time, you know, staff time that would be involved? Can we do some more work? What could be done to understand more about the feasibility of drawdown and its potential impact, given the dam, the bathymetry, et cetera? And then there's this sort of question, interest in thinking about the longer term role for the task force or pond management consultants that came up as well.
And I also heard, Toby, that we should review like all of them, against the criteria, right? This
Yes,
still needs to be
yeah.
reviewed. So we don't know how this rates against.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we'll be doing
Yeah,
as part of our
yeah.
process later on, but yeah.
I'm sure we
Great.
lose track of that, yeah.
So we had one
Yeah.
other thought that, oh, sorry, Keith.
Oh, no.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, so
Um,
we'll let Jeff thank you.
For members of that group, that it's great to have the Bear Hill Pond, is it Bear Hill?
Bear Pond, yeah.
As an analog,
Mhm.
and it would be important for any of the other, you know, manual removal or stuff to have an analog of a site that was successful.
Right.
To have a sense of what is the scale of effort needed, because it's too easy to say, we'll manage that with manual controls. But I think there's a lot of analogs that haven't been successful.
Well, but just as a quick reaction, what I heard from Bear Hill Pond is you're never gonna be completely successful. This is gonna be a constant problem. And you're always gonna be facing into this problem of the invasives. They have tried so many different things. They've tried herbicides. For them, the two things that seem to have some success, at least pushing back, was the diver assisted suctioning out, which is expensive. I can tell you right now, I think it's like $20,000 for 2 acres. 40,000 for 2 acres. So, however, you know, they said, once we do 2 acres, we probably won't have to go back in there again for another 10 years. And then we were gonna keep on pushing to do that. And then they're playing so that's been very important too. But then the bigger thing is the drawdown. And they said, yes, it's a constant experiment, you know, not experiment, but it's a constant monitoring, seeing whether it's effective, where it has not been effective, et cetera. So yeah, that's my sense, is it'll be an ongoing, it'll never be a one-time fix, of course, you know.
And you're saying diver assisted, how
Yeah.
deep is that to have a diver assist? 'Cause
Go as deep as I think you can go as deep as you want. He said to us, help me with this bird, they put on their gear, they have a suction hose, they go down there and they kind of mow and take up all the silt as well as all the plant life. They pump it onto what looks like a huge dumpster that sits someplace, could sit in the water or it can sit on a beach or someplace else. It filters through, the water comes out and all the detritus is left inside.
even if it's like 4 feet deep or 8 feet deep.
Yeah, it
It's
doesn't.
still a diver down
It's-
there.
Well, you probably could do it less so in the
Maybe
shallower
4 feet
water.
down.
Yeah, you probably could, you know, they didn't tell you about that, but that's right, you probably could.
Maybe we're gonna have a
But-
walker.
Have a walker assisted, thing. But those, I think those were the two things that he thought were the most, really the only things I think he thought were successful.
Yeah, and it sounded like the diver stuff, they had really just
Just started,
started, so
Uh-huh.
they were,
yeah, excited about it, thought it had real possibilities, but they just get started it, yeah.
and he did mention, how different years, the effectiveness changes, you know, if you don't have a really cold winter. You know,
That's right,
it doesn't-
that's also true.
Doesn't have the same effect as it,
Yep,
Can you say again what the price was of the diver?
40,000 for 2 acres.
Okay.
Jeff, just want to check, is there like a request or suggestion in there
Yeah,
for the next
we
round
do.
of this,
Can
that
we-
you want to articulate to the group?
Well, I guess for anything that we recommend, is there a sense that this would be successful? Like we have the assessments or the evaluations in the is it the watershed management plan that they reviewed a lot of options and I don't remember any that were recommended here for Warner's Pond. So I just don't want to be too easy in recommending
no,
some solution that we don't really have evidence that it will.
no, and that may fall, actually, go back towards what Malcolm had begun, because we're actually recommending a study rather than the thing itself. So that study may come back and say, this is just not going to work in this pond, in which case we're back to do nothing or close to it.
I think ideally having some kind of, really a little more specific management plan that actually can break up the pond into different zones
Yeah.
and we know what's there. I mean, that might work in some spot and then we use something else somewhere else, but I think that all comes later, like you're saying. Just
Yeah, it comes later.
put everything on the table now and we'll figure it out how to use it in the future.
Yeah, I, not that I would keep the narrative going too long for you, but I've spent a lot of time out in Bear Hill Pond, I have a place up there, and it's, it works very well in the inlets. I mean, with the shallow water, it's amazing how quickly that's clear, and they bring that down almost to dry, you know, it's emptied out into about 2 or 3 feet of water, and, those are remarkable every year, how they get cleaned out.
Thanks.
I think what he really stressed in that conversation too, kind of goes off all this, is that every water body is a little bit different.
Yep.
And, you know, we're not gonna, there's no way we could say right now, if you could draw the pond down, if it would work there or not. It
No.
would have to be looked at specifically at Warner's Pond.
Yeah, so you're right, so a study has to be done.
Other feedback, questions to the group?
So I think we're we're gonna look into what would happen. Our group, I think I'd say, if nothing was done, we'll try to find some scenario about that. We'll try to look at, something about costs. And then you'll give me the other questions those are the 2 big takeaways that I picked up from this. Is that right?
Then at some point, are we all doing it together, the criteria assessment?
Oh, you know what
or
to
each
say?
group doing it separately?
Well, what we actually did is, and if you look at our report, we actually answered all the questions on the, I'm not saying we did it well, that's the other problem. But we went through every one and we said, yes, we would, not so much. I mean, it isn't great, but it is an attempt to do it.
Thank you.
And we could look at that at some point too.
It's actually not a bad idea as a group to go through it yourself.
Yeah, that's
You've
right.
been- You've been dealing with it, you know, and then say, okay, everybody, this is what we came up with, but
Yeah,
you know, what do you think? Now you're looking at it differently.
So we should do that.
yeah,
Yes.
And use that, I think, also as a tool to just reality check your proposal, and can we make this even better? Have we uncovered every stone?
Right, right.
Make it as strong as possible.
Right.
But yeah, to be clear, we will be doing that as a
yeah,
full group and
absolutely.
move forward on the discussion. I do just wanna, one thing I'm curious about, did your group have, like did you decide if there's any work that we could do now or that we could move forward now around the drawdown? Right, is that?
I think we're gonna really depend on, the Natural Resources Department and, you know, the division and, if this thing is put in place to, find, you know, to either work with, EA or someone else and get the hard engineering data and the biological data that you need to know what would the effect be. I don't think we're not.
Right, so I mean, not us as a.
No, I mean, even our
task force,
subgroup, our subgroup, I don't think we can do that.
But is there a ask that we could, as a task force, decide we want EA to?
Oh,
look
I
into
see,
this
I
kind of
see.
On our timeline, or is that, yeah, I'm just curious.
Is there? In other words, have it done now.
Yeah,
have it
yeah,
done.
exactly, or something, you know, as we evaluate these
And I
alternatives.
go back to, we should figure out how many options. we
Oh,
have.
yeah, yes.
Do we want them to
See-
evaluate 2 of ours and 2 of yours?
Yeah,
and
yeah,
one of these,
absolutely.
Or do we want to
Yes.
evaluate only one at the end of the day?
Right.
So we have to figure that out.
That's right. Sorry.
So,
So not
the,
yet.
the answer now is we're
Not
not
yet.
ready to decide
yet.
that, but
Yeah.
potential, okay,
Good.
great. All right, well, there are no more questions, I think we can move on, ahead of schedule for, a change, which is great. So Rachel, I'll hand it back to you. I think, so we, as a planning team, we're thinking about today, and we thought we'd just do kind of a check-in with the work groups and not actually go and break into work groups, just that that's gonna take a long time, and, you know, we are sure the groups at least can share a little bit of their progress and, maybe get some guidance. So I'll turn it to Rachel to facilitate this, and, yeah. See what you have to say.
Yes, So we wanted to try to give each of the work groups just 10 minutes to try to just do a status report on your progress so far, if that works for you, and certainly feel free to not use all the time if you don't have to keep talking. I'm sure everyone would be happy.
Yeah, it'd be nice. Yeah, it could happen.
It would be a mini miracle. So, and that would include, reporting on your status, but also raising any questions, any stumbling blocks, any points where you want feedback from the rest of the task force on. And I know also that there's a question out there from the dredging group about, I think there's a question out there for the dredging group about is the task force okay with estimates of 35,000 cubic yards in the field and the other two numbers, and whether, right, that came up at the last, am I not saying that in the way that you all remember in the dredging?
It was, and then we talked about that some more, and and you don't have to, you don't have, I think, yeah, you don't, yeah, should we just, so
Yeah, go ahead.
anyways.
I don't
Give us a
wanna-
report.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't. wanna
and
put you
and
right
feel
in
free,
the-
especially Paul, feel free to jump in.
Yeah,
So in our last
Okay.
meeting, we basically got the cubic volume of the area between Bruce Freeman Rail Trail and Route 2.
Mhm.
And we said it was approximately 50,000, so 49,500 cubic yards. And so we were like, okay, great. So now we're looking at potentially using that, but the first thing you have to do is you have to take off the top layer of that and then put the dredge underneath. Now, another option came up that 2229 Main is looking for materials for fill. And so Paul spoke with somebody and they said they could use some of that material, not the dredge material, but some of the material from the topsoil, et cetera, from that area. So potentially, how deep could we dig that? How much could we give to 2229? But a key question is the timing of that. And if we commit to that, then what does that mean about committing to dredging versus something else? So there's a lot of kind of issues on the table there that we haven't quite filtered through yet. But really an interesting opportunity. And therefore, would we be dredging the 35? Could we dredge 50? Could we dredge more? And we also talked about the fact that we would still keep, what was it, I think 5,000, was it 5,000 cubic yards near Scout Island that was initially in the plan.
In pond placement.
In pond placement, thank you. So those were the things that we were grappling with, and
Hey, Chris, can I just chime in on the
yes,
222?
please.
So Bruce
NCI.
Thompson, who's the project manager over there, is going to join us on October 9th.
Mhm.
He was not disinterested in the opportunity because he needs different types of soil, and he needs topsoil to cap off some of the areas. That use of fill is underway right now. So I asked him, well, when would be the end date for needing fill? It's out there a couple of years. So the timing is critical, and he'd have to analyze that area. They have to make sure it's suitable. But I think it's a possibility. So we're going to explore that. So just want to add that.
So that was an interesting possibility for us for dredging, because as we all know, the largest part of the dredging bid was the removal of that dredging and moving it. So this would be we would put the dredge in the location right next to the pond. Then we'd have to put the topsoil back on to ensure 6 inches. And we obviously couldn't go above the road or above the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, but there's different elevations, and if we were to take more soil out, it would create more opportunities.
Yeah,
Yes.
if that's the question, it seems to me to, sort of on Malcolm's note of, we need to know the full scenario. There was talk earlier on, like, what if we have room to dredge more and it's less expensive than we anticipated? It would be good to know how much we could dredge within our budget, right?
Correct.
So let's just say it can hold 50,000 plus 5,000 goes on Scout Island, that's already 55,000, like, what if we dredged 100,000, I think was Paul's number at one point. And if that's within budget, because I think that's one of the numbers that we potentially had, what would that look like for the pond and where could it go? And
Right, we were
it would
just-
just be good to
Yeah,
know, right?
we
So
were
that it's
discussing
like
that.
no dredge, 550,000, and then what is the more look
Right.
like?
And we've talked about that,
Mhm.
and the question becomes, how much really can we put
Yeah.
in this
Mhm.
space, and that's kind of the driver.
Yeah.
And then clearly, what would be the cost be to
But there were
do
other
that?
in pond areas, I thought we had looked at some of the marshy areas, so what can
We
support?
did, but we didn't really go back to that. We just talked about the 5,000 that would be kept in pond, because the more we can get out, the
Right.
better the water quality, you're getting the sediment out, so that was kind of our belief.
We also looked at sort of pond flow as well,
Yeah.
Right.
of how to connect from the areas that were
Mhm.
set up
Yeah.
to really look at the pond flow,
Mhm.
is how it comes in. And really look at how we can expand that so that it actually creates a better flow.
Yeah.
And then looking at the edges that kind of go up to Jerome and down by
Right.
Good
the
progress.
Commonwealth.
Yeah, to help us determine, where are the better, where else can we dredge, what makes sense?
Yeah.
So that's what we've been talking about and working on.
Great.
Does the work group have a question for the task force? Is there anything that you need feedback on in regard, well, to any of that
Mhm.
at this point?
Well, we talked about needing task force approval, I think, to get the land surveyor. to do that.
Right, so, yeah, so just before we go off the size of the fields, that volume is, that whole 50,000 yards or 49.5 is for the whole field itself. But we also don't know yet how much room would be taken up or volume would be taken up by, dewatering, access, staging, stockpiling, so it's going to be slightly less than that 49,500 cubic yards. So that's just something to, it's not an apples to apples of what's coming out of the pond. And then, so the question that you're referring to is with so if we redo the dredging bid, we have right now plans that, I mean, relatively speaking, they're correct, but elevation speaking, they're not, right? Because they used the ESS plans that are different from what EA's surveyor collected in the, this, 30% dam removal design. So EA's surveyor coincides with PAR's inspections of the water surface elevation being, I think it's 118.8, I think anyway, so those numbers, their numbers are correct. So we have a question about whether we should be, because those numbers are not, for the dredging plans, those numbers are not correct from an elevation standpoint. We feel that is a question for the task force. Should we be spending additional money to get that corrected? Which would have to be done regardless if we move forward with dredging, but would not necessarily have to be done if we didn't. But we do think I personally think it's advisable if we were going to get more information on, looking at a new dredging plan using that, we're calling it the North Fields, the field between Route 2 and Bruce Freeman. So that's the question. Should we be spending that? Yeah.
Can I just, I think in our discussion, we felt that in order for us to bring a proposal before the task force, we'd have to know that, because the proposal would be, how much to dredge, where to dredge, and I think the elevations are important. So for us to put together a feasible proposal that has some veracity, I think we have to get that information.
So there's a kind of a gate, right? Unlike Vicky's point was well made about not spending money for other things, but this is a gate. You can't go further until you get past that gate of a survey, right? So I think it's something we ought to approve.
That wasn't a lot of money if I remember, just. We.
What are we
Yeah,
talking?
we don't
about?
know. Do we know?
Couple
I don't-
several thousand, I think it's-
I don't have good, I don't have good ballpark.
Or is it like 5, 20, 100, 200, what are we talking about?
$100?
All right, do it.
But did we hear from Alex last meeting in response to this question that since we're talking about relative depths, right?
Yeah.
We're just like, there's the surface, call it 119 or 114 or
Mhm.
something wacky. And they have depth to sediment and then depth to refusion, so.
Right.
Refusal, do we, I'm
Yeah, I
a
mean,
little
I think,
slippery on
right, it's-
understanding
you're
what we need
right.
here versus we can calculate volumes because it's the same sediment.
yeah,
Um,
it would be using data that we know is inaccurate. Just by using those elevations. I don't think, I asked, well, can't we just take off like the difference in the 118.8 minus 116.4 or whatever the changes?
Mhm.
And it's not as straightforward as that
Yeah.
because the bathymetry is different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Well, it seems worth a few $1,000s to
Yeah.
make sure everyone's able to say like, okay, we don't have fishy data or
Right.
inconsistencies.
So one of the goals for dredging is to really optimize the depths to help manage things like the aquatic invasives.
Yeah.
So if you don't have the depths correct, based off of the actual elevations, it's hard to know exactly where to target dredging to a certain depth.
So you know. the
So that-
buffer rate.
Yeah, it's enough.
Right.
Right, I
Yeah.
mean, relatively speaking, you do, but it's
Yeah.
just, you don't
It's
have.
not
the-
dialed in.
It's
We
not,
can't-
it's not tied into
Yeah.
the real.
Yeah.
On the ground condition.
Seems like an ambiguity we should
I know.
clean up.
Yeah,
Right.
Agree.
I don't think it'd be a big cost.
Okay.
you wanna vote on that? Do we need a vote?
Yeah.
Spend money.
Do we, is there a way to like, maybe like cap it, like?
Yeah,
We
you can
think
say
that
up
this
to
is
whatever
up to-
amount.
Cause like, I mean, it probably is a relatively cheap amount, but like if it comes back.
It's not gonna come back 100, but right, you
Yeah.
wanna cap it at up to 10,000 or
Like,
you
it
know,
just
whatever
feels
you're
like
comfortable
it
with.
might, there might be a discussion at a certain point of like, is it really materially
Yeah.
different? You could
Yeah.
materially change your proposal.
So I move we spend up to $10,000 to ascertain this.
Any
Is that
second?
reasonable, 10,000?
Yeah.
I think so.
Second?
Should we go around the room?
Well, I'm just wondering if we should like qualify that with maybe some further discussion if we don't get something.
Well, when we come back and you tell me it's
Well,
15,000 and we
I mean-
talk about if we should do
Yeah.
that.
It's like, what if it's
Right?
11? I mean, is that
Well,
gonna
then we
be-
can talk
yeah.
about it, yeah, at least let's start here and we can go from there.
Yeah, I don't think we're saying like, then we don't do it.
We're gonna find
We
out the
want it
price,
longer.
we're gonna
Yeah.
find out. And then we can approve it and not approve it.
I mean, it'll take that much time to put it out for quotes, get quotes back. So,
Yeah, we can approve a quote if it's 11,000, even though we just said this, right?
yeah, we could,
As
I
a
would
group.
just bring,
Well,
we
I'd
could
say
bring back.
Staff discretion to 25% or something like that,
Plus
doesn't have to
100.
prove something at
Yeah.
12,500.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or just say up to 15,
Yeah.
I mean. it depends
I
on
like
what you're
that.
comfortable with, because what amount.
Anybody's
Can I suggest an amendment to the motion?
Yeah, let's
Yes,
hear it.
yes, I guess.
Why don't we just vote to get an estimate on the cost? And then come back to the task force to get approval to spend.
There you go.
That makes sense.
That's a great idea.
Very sensible.
So much fun.
It's
Sounds good,
challenging
Paul.
for us to put out a bid if we don't have an intention to award.
Mm.
So if
Okay.
it comes back at 16,000 and people aren't comfortable with that, we should just know what the amount is that we have, that this task force is comfortable spending
Yeah.
at this point, and if it comes out higher and people aren't comfortable, well, we don't have available funds.
You can't give us a off guess even what you think it would be?
It's not like a topographic,
Yeah,
it's a different company. You send somebody out in the boat and they're doing soundings, and I just don't have any experience
Yeah.
to know
I'm
what.
baffled
did
that
that.
EA did this 4 years ago. The 30% design subcontractor just did it. So I'm still kind
So
of baffled. why
ESS
we
did
need
it
to-
in 2017.
Okay. And then this other company just did it to inform the 30% design.
They were, there was.
Within just the area of the dam removal,
Dam.
right? So, yeah,
What, you've been involved in this, guesses on money?
Oh, money? Ah, boy.
No, you know,
Private sector is different. I don't know.
That's specialized as well, that's.
yeah.
Specialized. Cause you're getting their stamp.
It's
we
pretty
have that.
efficient. I mean, you can move through pretty quickly. I mean.
Let me ask that, if it came back, if the, came back, it's gonna cost us 20,000, are we gonna vote it down?
Well, we could also look at reducing the scope of the work if it comes in that high. We could
Yeah.
just say, okay, only do it in these 3 areas. You're proposing these 17 areas, maybe we only need it in 10. And so we could work with the number to get a budget. So it gives us, all we need is the depth in a few areas to understand how off we are, right? It's not like we need
So,
the
yeah,
whole design.
yeah, but again, we're not involved in that subcommittee. I just assume give them their head and say, well, let me, oh, here we go, they were negotiating numbers. I say give them 15,000 and say, if it's more than that, come back to us.
Yeah. Okay,
What do people
I
think?
agree to that amendment.
I don't know if I can make an amendment, now that I think about it.
It's never been seconded, so you can actually make a new
Yes.
motion.
Oh.
Go for it, Vicky. Yeah.
I move that we approve up to $15,000 expenditure to ascertain the depths.
to conduct an elevation.
Conduct an
survey
elevation survey
Of the pond.
of the pond.
Yeah.
A second.
Thank you.
So do we have to go around and vote?
Yeah.
Yep,
Keith?
I,
Sorry, discussion. This will get us depth to the top of the sediment and then
It
depth.
will
to-
get us an actual, full survey of the bathymetry of the pond.
With the depth of sediment.
No,
We have that on.
it will be the
No.
existing condition, so it'll be the top of the sediment. We know what the sediment depths are through like 100+ transects of the.
That was what I was, okay.
Yeah.
good man.
Do I
Yes.
need to vote?
Yep, Paul,
Yeah.
and oh, David also.
Aye.
Paul,
Aye. Yes.
do you need to vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye,
Aye.
okay.
All right.
I
Unanimous.
yes.
apologize, it's not hundreds transects, it's a couple dozen, but we do know the sediment depths.
Yes. got it.
Okay, all right, well, thank you, everybody.
Yeah,
Okay,
Appreciate that.
is the dredging group done? Is there anything else you wanted to?
I think that's it, right?
Okay, so all we have left
Yeah.
are the dam removal work group. Do you have anything that you want to report on or ask about?
I think we got our exciting thing this afternoon, so.
Well, yeah.
The report is in.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
We're very excited. We've started to look through it. I think our next step was we're going to meet and do what you had asked us at the last meeting, which is do the adverse effects of the scenarios and then we're gonna go through the chart of criteria for each of the schemes. And so it's gonna take us a little while.
oh, yeah.
It's complicated and we will report back. We're meeting next week,
Wednesday
Wednesday.
at Harvey Wheel.
If they want to join, and then we will report back on our findings, but we were waiting for this design report to answer a bunch of questions. So, we now have it, thank you.
Good.
Anything else from you guys? No. That's all we decided was to have another meeting, really.
Just absorbing.
great. All right. Thank you all. So the next piece of this is to have a look ahead. And I'm gonna turn this over to Chris and Bill to talk about a little more, but basically we have 4 meetings left. And we wondered about whether the other groups can give a sense of their timeline for having a proposal finalized.
Well, do you want to say something first?
No, go ahead.
That sounds pretty ominous. We have only 4 meetings up, that's true, and but we know may take longer. I mean, our sense is that we may have to go up, for a few more months after that.
Couple more months.
Yeah, and that makes sense, a couple more months. Nevertheless, I know for me, often these small groups, it is true. We sometimes push off the harder questions because we don't want to kind of get, we just really have an unending time. So my guess is we're going to be pushing ahead. We're not going to end in December. but let's not go another year. Let's get this wound up. That's in a few months after that. I know, Bruce, you're ready to keep
Well,
on.
no, I also know that, our appointments end on the 31st.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
We'll have to,
So we have to extend. it.
yeah, we'll have to extend it.
Well,
Yeah.
so just as a
Yeah.
thought, it's not as simple as,
Somebody's keeping
let's
an
keep
eye
going.
on it.
Okay.
So I'm curious, anyone not comfortable with continuing? You don't have to say it right now, but I hope you're not. I hope we.
Do you agree? Do you agree with that or?
Yeah, I agree. The town meeting is gonna be pushed back this year because of the 250th
Oh.
things, so it'd be good to sort of work backwards
Hmm.
to what I think the initial intent was to sort of
point.
have that in mind and say,
Good
okay,
point.
what would be our date to get
That's a
anything in
good,
the flow of town meeting?
that's a good point. Frankly, I thought we weren't gonna be able to do it. That was the back of the envelope for me, but maybe we will. That's a good point.
When's the deadline for submitting?
I don't know. Do you-
I'm not sure, but,
It's usually January,
it's usually the first week in January for the
Yeah.
April town
We
meeting.
won't be ready. I don't think we'll be ready.
No.
No, but given that we
So
have a
probably
little
be
buffer on
pushed out
town meeting.
6 weeks. I'm
6
I'm
weeks, okay.
anticipating.
So yeah, end of January, we'd have to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right, by the end of January. But,
Let's see.
Good to have that in the,
no, it's good. You're absolutely right. So we'll look at
Yeah.
a calendar and that's a good point.
All right, so next agenda item, we're gonna schedule meetings every 2 days in January.
Calling you and
Yeah.
emailing you
No.
incessantly to ask
Yeah.
where you're at.
Yes, I guess one of the things that we were thinking, in our last meeting is we were thinking that perhaps as a dredging group, we could potentially make our presentation October 29th. So that's what we were thinking, like our kind of first go round, our first more in-depth. We say that now, it's a target for us. So I'm not sure where you guys are at now. You've already presented once before, but now you need to go back and go through a lot of
2
information.
weeks, with this whole group in 2 weeks, but I don't think we'll
No.
have the full.
But maybe the first week of November, our first meeting in November, we might.
Or if we could split that late October meeting, I think we'd have time for another meeting
Maybe.
to finalize things.
Do you wanna- But we have another meeting of this group before we have to commit to that.
Yeah.
Okay, because I think we should meet that one time and see how we do with this process first. And if it feels like we're cranking, we can commit to it. right?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
not, you know,
Okay,
but I'm pushing.
You're not gonna
you
hold
know.
us?
Yeah, right. When's our next meeting? The 10th?
10,
Yeah.
So the next meeting's the 10th, and then it would be the 29th. So we'll have nothing scheduled as far as any presentations for the 10th. But then we will try to do one the 29th.
And then I think there's only one meeting in November, as I recall.
Yes, that's right. November 13th, I
So-
think,
Yeah,
Yeah,
And then one in.
and one in December.
December.
right.
Yeah.
so, sorry, we have October 10th,
And then
October
October 29th.
Mhm.
so I won't be here. for-
Oh,
And can I confirm we're gonna be moving to the meetings is 6?
Exciting.
So that's
Plan was-
another,
that's
that's the
that-
next.
That's on the
target.
agenda.
Right.
So what did you?
She was asking about the timing of the meetings.
Right, yes, yeah.
That would be next, right?
All right, well, shall we move forward with the next agenda topic?
I'd like to, maybe push our group a little bit to see if we can try to aim for also presenting, October 29th.
Yeah, I think it's worth trying for, but I think we should probably have that.
Yeah,
One.
we'll have a better sense to be
Yeah.
able to report back on.
I won't be here, but
it.
I might be able to, I'll be in LA, but I might be able to, no, I think I'm on a flight, yeah. I can't.
We'll decide.
You guys should figure out.
Okay, good.
Great. Okay,
Back to Toby.
all right, so next agenda topic is our task force member topics of interest and next steps. So just as a reminder, this is a standing agenda item where we offer some space for task force members just to raise any items of interest, you know, anything going out in the community that you want to report back on or check in on. We have created a little list here of topics that we know. We have some things to check in with you on. So we'll go through those and then give anyone else who has something they wanna share with us a chance.
Oh, if you wanted
Let me try again. Here we go. Okay. Thanks, Jeff. So the first thing we want to touch base on is the letter of support for the Giroux Park CPC application. So as a reminder, we had Paul present on this at our last task force meeting. The suggestion coming out of that meeting is that we wanted to see the actual CPC application as it came in. So we sent that around, and it was very aligned with what Paul had shared with us at the last meeting. And so the question we want to put on the table today is, does the task force want to do a letter of support? I want to turn it over to Bill to kind of give a little bit of an update on this, because I know you've obviously had some communication with the NRC on this.
Yeah, so two things I want to say. One is that it was Delia brought it up at the Natural Resources Commission meeting, and they voted a letter of support for water access from Giroux Park to the waterway, whether it's pond or stream. So that was pretty significant, I think. The letter hasn't arrived yet. Paul and I are both on the Community Preservation Committee. And I must say, this is I'm new at it. I'm new in that committee. The idea of a letter from Natural Resources and from this group is significant. And I think they're expecting and hoping that we would do something like that to let them know where we stand. So I was happy to report to them at the meeting that the Natural Resources Commission has already voted for it, and we'll have a letter for them very quickly. I would say it'd be very good if we could have a letter. I think to overcome some of the notions, and of course we can talk about this, and we got to some extent pretty close. Without going into the detail as to how the park's going to be organized. All I think really need to say is we believe there should be a formal controlled water access from Giroux Park to the Warner's Pond and the Neshoba Brook. I say formal and controlled because, otherwise it could be anyone could be wandering anywhere. We want to make sure there is some control as to where people are getting down to the pond. So that I would think a simple statement from our task force saying that would be really valuable for this application. Paul?
I think I'm sorry, one other thing I wanted to add to that is that even though we had talked about the deadline being, I think it was November 1st.
Yeah.
I think it's important that if we're going to send a letter, that sooner rather than later is important, because if you're putting in the CPC application and I think it's important to say, well, look, this is all the support we have behind it. And so they can see it right away versus, oh, here it is just about November 1st and we got another letter in. I just think it just shows that we're more supportive and behind it to get it in sooner rather than later, should we choose to vote to do it.
So can I make a proposal that we ask the chairs, sorry, to submit a letter to the CPC expressing our support for the proposal and adding that we would like to make sure that it does in a controlled way.
Good.
Thank you. Is that a motion?
Sorry, a motion. A motion. A motion for the proposal. I will, yeah.
I second that.
Second it. Any more discussion or? Great. So let's vote on it.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye. Great.
David and Paul,
Aye.
So.
Good.
silent aye.
Good.
Thank
Okay,
you.
we got it, yeah.
Okay.
Just to, Bill, one thing I want to add on the timing. The applicants come in for an interview probably in October. And while it's not essential, it'd be nice for the applicant to say that letter of support has already been filed. So another issue on timing, it just helps the applicant, who's in this case is chair of the Recreation Commission, when he comes in, nice to have that. So just want to
Done, Paul.
the sooner the better thing has a meaning to it. Yeah. Thank you.
Well,
Bill already wrote the letter.
It's right here.
Watch out, watch out.
I don't think that is phone sent. Okay,
Thank you.
great. Yeah, thank you, everyone. So, next item we want to talk about was meeting timing and locations. Okay, so, we did a survey on this. So just as a reminder for some of you who, would like a little reminder, an update, we had a conversation at the last meeting, about when to have our task force meetings and where. So, we no longer have access to Harvey Wheeler until 6 p.m. So that gave rise to a conversation. Do we want to just use Keith Road? Do we want to continue to alternate? Do we want to have Harvey Wheeler at 6 o'clock and then Keith Road at 5 o'clock if we alternate? And I think my impression is we were homing in on, well, maybe we'll just go with 6 o'clock. That seems to work just as well for folks, maybe even better for some, and continue to alternate because people see value in both venues. And we did a survey on this and it was unanimous. With the grand total of 1 response. That was preferred option. But in any case, we wanna name that was a suggestion in the survey. Also, my impression, although folks might feel differently, of where we were kind of circling around at the last meeting. So want to test to you all if that feels doable, moving meetings to 6 p.m., continuing, alternating between the venues. I'm seeing some nods. Yeah. Anyone have concerns about that?
That would help some of us who've been rushing to get
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
to sort of
Yeah.
switch up the pain point
Yes.
a little bit. So.
True.
Yeah,
Yeah, makes sense, yeah.
okay, great, so we'll do that moving forward.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so meeting time changed,
And the meetings are only gonna be an hour, right? Is that what you said?
yeah, so, right, another comment we received
dinner.
was,
With dinner.
interest in keeping these meetings as concise and on point and moving forward as we can, and I just say we definitely take that seriously. I think we also take seriously feedback we've gotten that people want space when
Yeah.
issues are really, going strong and there's good dialogue to continue that. So we're gonna, I think, try to continue to balance those appropriately and really value your time, but also give necessary time for conversations when they seem productive.
Yep.
Okay, so next item on the bulleted list there is site visits. So we received a request from you all at the last meeting to basically look into where can we get, a person who kind of knows the site and knows the history to actually show us around dam removal sites, dredging sites. So we, Julie, I don't know if you want to say just a little bit about sort of the outreach that you have done or will be doing around this to try to identify some folks.
Right, so we did talk in our dredging subgroup about having somebody from Army Corps or possibly somebody from the town of Milford coming to talk to us about their dredging project. Something that we will be doing from a staff standpoint is reaching out to the DEP regions, the central and northeast regions, to see if they can identify, they could just put out on their listservs, if there are people, if there are communities who have done dam removals or dredging projects that would be willing to host a group for us to come and visit. So, we'll do it with the parameters of having it be, in a town center and, it's as similar to Warner's as we can get. So we're doing that reach out this week.
The other thing we wanted to note is we do have such a contact in, and so we basically just wanted to say if anyone would like to visit the Plymouth Dam, our dam removal sites, right? And they also have dredging sites there as well. So Gil, you can say a little more about what they
Sure,
look like, but we can connect and organize that if there's interest.
So Jenny Brook in Plymouth has had a number of dam removals over the past 20 years. And there's one dam that they're not taking down because it goes back to, the 1600s, I think. It's what we understood, 1700s maybe. But they're doing dredging in that location. And so they're small impoundments. I think the largest was, 10 acres plus or minus. But it is within the town center and it's a bit of a a bit of a haul to get down there, but if people are interested, there is that possibility of seeing a series of dam removals, that have occurred.
How long
in
ago
Plymouth.
did they do them?
Sorry?
How long ago? Like,
So the oldest one was 20 years. And do you recall what the newest one? I want to say like within 5
oh, so
years.
it's like a pretty wide variety. Of,
Yeah.
States on.
Yeah.
And
Have they
then
done the dredging? Have they done the dredging?
They haven't done the
They
dredging.
haven't. Okay. So we'd only see dam removal there.
You'd only see dam removal.
So definitely, open suggestions on how to move forward on this. My sense is if anyone in the group, is interested in going to Plymouth, just send the planning team an email. I think we'll maybe in a follow-up message to the task force, just for those of us, those folks who aren't here, just say, if you're interested, let us know by X date.
Okay.
Then whoever is in that group will connect with the Plymouth contacts, to make arrangements. That sound good to folks?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Okay. And I think if that happens, I think it would be great to hear from you all afterwards about how it went. So next one on our list is Acton. So just want to do a quick little update. We had gotten some interest in folks kind of understanding what's going on with the Acton dam removal. So we are reaching out to the Conservation Commission to connect them with our dam removal work group. So we're going to keep that in the work group for now. Obviously, if anyone else is interested and also being part of that, who's not in the dam removal work group, feel free to reach out. I assume that's okay with the dam removal folks. Okay. Just let us know. And then the other thing we just wanted to say is another suggestion that we've heard is maybe we should do another Warner's Pond site visit in the fall, just given that things look different now from when we went there before. So we wanted to put that to the group and see what the interest might be. What do you all think?
That'd be great.
Okay. Is anyone interested in organizing that this time around? Being our point person. So last time I think it was Jeff and Keith who did a great job.
Good try, good try. Either one of them were saying.
Everybody's looking at you and saying, "Ready again."
Gonna get the band back together.
Yeah, great job. No one can do it as well as you two.
I'm not sure we need a leader though at this point. We're just good with our eyes closed, but yeah, I mean,
Okay, great.
we can help organize that again, sure.
Geez, thank you, we really
Did we?
appreciate that.
Last time it took a little bit of coordinating to kind of find a time. Do people feel like that if we put times out there based on our leader's availability and then kind of similar to what it was, I think it was like a Saturday morning that that ended up working well.
Right.
We can just name a date, and if you can make it, great. Does that work for folks?
Sure.
Okay. Great. Oh yeah, please, yeah, welcome.
Could, my experience with the Assabet River cleanup, which I've done for a number of years, is that the rivers are very, very low. And then we have the tail end of a hurricane come through and the rivers are full again. And right now there's a hurricane that could well fill everything up again.
Yeah.
But if this one doesn't, the next one might. So we should really make this happen sooner rather than later if we want to see what the situation is like at very low water.
So the hurricane is coming now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So this could
So we
be
may miss
after this weekend. Okay. So are you suggesting we do it like this weekend, Malcolm, or?
No, I'm just putting it out.
Yeah,
there,
all right.
but
So as soon as we can.
it should be
Yeah.
sooner rather than later.
Okay.
Well, it
So-
might be also like a good point of like, if you're around, you're like, wow, the water's really low there, like snap a picture, so we can like have some sort of reference.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right, this weekend, we wouldn't be able to do it this weekend, so this Saturday, just because of posting purposes.
Yeah.
But the other
Right.
thing is that people can always go and see,
Yeah.
do their own, sort of schedule.
Yeah.
Site visit.
I have people on this all the time. I just kayaked last week. I was amazed at how thick the growth is. It's stunning. Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting though, too, you could see a channel.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
clear.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll get moving and try to get that
Sure.
on the calendar as soon as we can. Next, next issue is, we had a suggestion that it might be helpful to have another expert come in that could speak to wetlands restoration and planting. So we've heard the concerns around invasives, around, what would the wetlands plant system look like after a dam is removed in particular. And so we just wanted to check in on that. We did, have the one poll response that hopefully ranked it right in the middle.
Well, now that we have the 30% report, the design report,
Yeah.
it would be good if we do have this person to actually look at that, because it does identify deep marsh, low marsh,
Mhm.
whatever, some different types of,
Yeah.
planting that we're
Mhm.
going to see. It would be good to actually understand what those mean from this person.
Uh-huh,
Oh,
yeah,
It's a
right.
good point.
So we're happy to look into this and, we could see, they might even be available at the next meeting within the
Sure.
promises, but.
Is it something for the whole, is it something that maybe a committee needs more than the whole group?
I was
needs?
wondering the same thing.
You say, again, what
Well, because right
the
now,
question would be that you.
we now
want.
have this, right, in the 30%
Mhm.
design report.
Mhm.
And it identifies the different, it identifies actually no channel, no creek, it identifies only shallow emergent marsh, deep marsh, shrub swamp, deciduous forested wetland, and upland forest. It would be really interesting, I think, for us to understand what types of plantings are in each of those areas and what kinds of native plants would we need to have there to keep out the invasives, right? Because,
I think, so getting to sort of the wording of this bullet.
Yeah.
The planting expert, I do think, and Joe told us this, I think that in his experience, when an impoundment, when the sediment was revealed, the native plants, the seed bank responds pretty quickly. Invasives can be among those, and so I think we still have questions, or folks have questions about invasives management.
right,
And the idea of planting, I don't think that's typically, I don't think that's a
Management.
typical need.
But-
Planting usually isn't, it's actually the exposed, there's a woman, Kate, who's the river keeper for Save the Bay.
Mhm.
That I work with quite a bit, who's been out doing inventories right now because the rivers are so low.
Mhm.
So they're starting to see those seed banks come up.
Yeah.
And she's a wetland biologist, actually. Which I could pass on her phone number.
Yeah.
I guess
I'll do it through.
yeah, because we're seeing a lot of invasives right now out there,
Yeah.
and so my question is, if we continue to drop the water level, how are all these marshes and swamps going to be invasive free? What's it gonna take?
Yeah, so that seems one set of questions. And then if others feel the need for a better visualization of what do these projected natural communities or these vegetated communities look and feel like, I guess that could be a question for this presentation.
To Bruce's, so I think we're taking note of that, right? And hear the change or suggestion around a little bit of a different focus, right? To Bruce's point, is this something that folks feel like would be helpful for the full group to hear? Is there interest among the broader task force, or is this something where we think it just should go to the dam removal group?
I think we need to hear it, right?
Okay.
To be able to be, because we talked about what's the end condition going to be, we
Yeah.
haven't been able to answer that question. I think this would help. Well, now this helps a little
Yeah.
bit, but
Mhm.
Another thing we could talk about next week is digging into those natural community descriptions that I shared, we talked about last
Yeah.
time, and even doing our own outing to see,
Yeah,
like
that'd be
over
great.
at Fort Pond Brook or whatever, like what these communities look and feel like.
Mhm.
So it sounds like you folks ought to talk first, and then if you think there's something that we all should
Yeah,
hear.
short
then we
clarity.
all- then we
Okay.
go.
So it sounds like dam removal group.
Okay.
But then I also think it's good to keep in mind, Bruce's contact with that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Sounds like a
definitely.
really
Yeah.
good
I'll pass it on to Tony.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Thank you.
Great.
Email, and then you can share it up.
So suggestion, we'll connect, the person we have in mind to the dam removal group
Yeah,
and
yeah.
look at Bruce's suggestion as well. And
Awesome.
if you guys feel like it's important to bring it to the full group, then we can do that moving forward. Great. All right, thank you. So next thing we just wanted to touch base on is public meeting. So we've spoken about doing 2 public meetings, and we're coming up towards, fall, going into the winter. So we thought it'd just be the appropriate moment to at least put this on your radar to think about. we also, after the last public meeting, folks had lots of suggestions, lots of ideas about what the goals should be and how we should think about outreach. When the appropriate moment for a public meeting would be, both in terms of the timeline of the year, but also our deliberations, right? When do we feel like it's gonna be most helpful to go back out, both for us, and also to the public, right? So, we don't need to have a long conversation and answer those questions today, but we just wanted to put it on your radar. And also what we're thinking we'll do is just in our poll, like ask you, some of those questions, like your basic input. What do you think the goals should be? What do you think of the timeline? And then we can share that out and have a conversation at our next meeting, when you guys will have had a little bit of a chance to think about it and reflect, and we'll have some written responses that we can share and talk about as well. So just wanted to name that and check in.
I just said one thing, I'm curious how things went for Chris yesterday she had a kind of a public meeting. Oh, yesterday?
It was yesterday, yeah.
At the League of Women Voters.
Right, yeah, I went to the League of Women Voters, and they had a panel, and they had, Paul actually was there, and he talked about 2229 Main. And there were two representatives from the Concord Public Schools and the Concord Carlisle Public School System, as well as Mary Hartman spoke from the Select Board and talked about what the Select Board was doing. And then I just really gave an update on what we're doing with our task force. And basically, I just talked about the fact that kind of gave background on it, everything that we've talked about kind of was in our letter. The pond has, we're looking at whether the pond has, eutrophication. We are looking to do something about this. We have now we've decided there's like 3 solutions. So we broke down into work groups, and we're looking at the dredging, the dam removal, and the short-term action group. And basically said that we have been, working on that. We will come together and decide as a group what is our best solution, and then we will present that solution to the Natural Resource Commission. And go from there, where our target was, I believe I said the target was the end of the year, but I felt that we would probably move into the beginning of next year as well. But that's where we're at.
Good.
Basically, that's what I said.
Great. Did they boo or did they?
You can ask.
I hope so, yeah.
It sounds so good, it's almost like you should do it at the Girl Scouts.
Okay, we'll find out. No, any tough questions or anything, or is it?
No, actually, I got a nice softball.
What was
I was
it? I'm
like,
so curious.
and then the hard one Delia took. Although I basically knew the answers to that, but I was quite happy that you volunteered to answer that.
What was your softball question? I'm so curious. People are asking.
Geez, what was it? It was just pretty straightforward. It was,
Process question? Was it the time frame? I don't remember.
I
what it
don't
was.
remember.
No,
It was
no,
just
no.
really a very basic,
Yeah.
very
That's how I was
basic
wondering too,
question.
yeah.
Yeah, it was not.
Okay.
Yeah, it was
Thank you.
almost like a
Bill Clemens,
2-word
nice
answer.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was
we're-
quite pleased.
Right, thank you for doing it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, so it sounds like we're kind of interested in starting to think about the public meeting, and
Yeah.
we'll get some input and talk about it next meeting. So next bullet,
Can I say
yeah,
one more
please,
thing
go
about
ahead.
the public meeting?
Mhm.
I think we should think about, are we ready to just share where we're at? I think that people will be looking for monetary values. What are you talking about? If you want to do dam removal, what are you talking about for money? If you want to do dredging, what are you talking about for money? I mean, otherwise, if we can't talk about some of those things, I'm not sure if it's worth having.
I agree.
Yeah, also, I agree with you, because I think last time what we heard was, we were thinking you were presenting something tonight. We were
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
surprised you didn't have anything to present.
Right,
So don't want to walk into that again.
Right.
We should have our 3 groups ready to present
Yeah.
right.
what they're proposing with or without financial backing, but there should be
But I
schemes
think we have,
presented.
and I think we
Yeah.
should have a sense of dollar
Yeah, I
values.
agree.
too,
Yeah,
though.
yeah.
But we
Yeah,
can't just walk in and say, we're
Right.
ready to hear more.
No, yeah.
right,
no.
because
That
we're
would be a
kind of, we're
Outcome.
kind of at the,
Yeah.
towards the end, not totally at the end, but.
Yeah,
Right.
so it might not be October.
And I don't wanna, this is your meeting, right? But I think it'd be great to time it when we have some of that information, but also at the moment in which hearing their reactions to some of that
Right.
could still really impact our
Right.
deliberation,
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
right? Okay, anything else on the public meeting folks wanna name? Okay. So,
David, can you hear me?
oh yeah, please, David, go ahead.
Yeah, I just was wondering if we did need to have all groups finished. I mean, it's sort of binary. We had nothing and they last time, and they said, we hoped you had something to present. But my thought is, you know, the enthusiasm with which today's presentation was received, as I was observing from here, I thought we might have something, you know, even if not everybody's done, to share that, people would, you know, gain confidence that there's been real thoughtful effort put in.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting idea, yeah.
I just thought of the question. It was about Scout Island. Because David, I specifically mentioned that, as we talked about different things that we were concerned and stakeholders and whatnot, that Scout Island, I specifically said that as an example, that it was important for the Scouts because of the crossover event to have water access to the island. And I kind of briefly explained the event. So somebody asked me if they had been out to Scout Island and was there anything out there? And I said, you know, it's owned by the Scouts. I said, technically, if you want to go there, you should ask permission from the Scouts. And when you guys go out there, whatever you bring, you bring back with you. You don't leave anything behind.
That's right.
So.
All right. You seem satisfied, David. You did a good job. All right, nice. Okay, well, let's, speaking of the Scouts.
Yes.
Liz, you want to give us a brief update?
Yeah, sure. So, at our last meeting, David reminded us that the Girl Scouts had last spring asked about, getting some sort of, understanding of what was going on, the background. So the Scout House owns Scout Island through the use of the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts. So they both have sort of a, have access and use of it. So the Girl Scouts were wanting to kind of understand what's going on. So I essentially, Chris and I must be the neighbor, the driveway gave us the same. That's exactly what Chris said. I was like, yes, I said that and that and that. I guess I covered it all.
Very good.
So it's essentially what I presented to them. And then we had like a little bit of discussion around Scout Island, because my daughter's younger, so I haven't, you know, brownies don't go primitive camping. So we talked a bit about how the Scouts have used it. The Girl Scouts have used it in the past. Essentially, they have not used it since 2019. They wanted to go camping this fall. But the two troop leaders who were planning on leading it, had separately gone out and decided the invasives were too challenging. They wouldn't be able to access the island well. And that's essentially why they've stopped using it. I think this is one of those differences. They tend to piggyback their trip with what we have so the big service unit events are lawn campment and encampment. Lawn campment is a day-long fall event. The older troops used to camp on Scout Island after that. They have not since 2019. There's also some Girl Scout reasons for it being a little bit more challenging because it's an island. They need to have 2 lifeguards with them. You need someone, there's like just a lot of certifications and trainings for adult volunteers, so they've had a hard time coordinating that. You know, but they also talked about like, they really appreciate having this like primitive, undeveloped camping space so local. And they, you know, they like having that space. I think for them, it's more about having access to this space one way or another. I think that, like I said, since they're trying to access them in the fall, where it's a little bit harder to get to, the canoeing piece of it is less, it's more about, they care a lot about the primitive space. And, you know, I kind of in my conversations, they're sort of, was so nerdy and no one go with it. You know, we talk a lot about the Girl Scout law and the Girl Scout promise and like the 2 pieces of the Girl Scout law that they're kind of trying to think about when they're framing their thoughts about it is sort of use resources wisely and making the world a better place. So that's sort of like, you know, how they're sort of thinking about it at the moment. We also had a separate discussion around having the older Scouts kind of involved, especially when we get to our public meetings so that they can really have that civic involvement and really talk to it. Like I said, the last time Scouts went camping was 2019. I think probably means. Oh my God, my math is gone. There was the CSA troops, so they'd be like having just graduated or just about to graduate. But there are we have leaders who have gone out there like more than 6 or 7 times. So we still have leaders who are very involved who have done that. So I know one of them we're getting on the list to kind of be more, try to make more of these meetings. But yeah, so, kind of opened up that pathway for like, having multiple places that they can kind of figure out where to talk to and like I said, I think because it's not like a formal event in the same way as crossover is, it's they're thinking about it a bit differently.
But it's good that they will utilize the island.
I mean, they, like I said, they want to, they were really hoping, so this year, they really wanted to have the, do a camping trip there. We're doing something up in Maudie, which is, I can't remember where it is, Hanover instead. But yeah, they really would like to be able to access and use it more.
It's good to know.
But like I said, I think timing wise, because so much of that stuff would have been in the fall.
Right.
Challenge.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, and the other thing about access is, and I think this is also probably related to the fall because the water levels are lowing, like they get worried about docking because of erosion, but I suspect that has to do with the water levels in the pond being low. Cause I don't feel like I noticed that when we were out there, like in the spring.
It was difficult to get on the island.
Okay,
remember
okay,
that.
I didn't go out for it, okay.
Yeah, it was difficult to get on the island. You
Okay,
had
when it's
to,
high.
yeah, you had to like crawl up
Okay.
this high
It's not a
bank.
duck.
Yeah,
There's no duck.
Right,
yes,
right.
but yeah, so. But,
Great.
and, yeah, they kind of were like, whatever, if we need any sort of direction or inspiration from them, or.
Yeah, sure.
Definitely start to reach out. That way.
Good.
Thank you for making that connection.
No, it's great. It was really fun for me to like hear about how they.
And thanks for doing that too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My daughter just joined the Girl Scouts. She's 5, and so we have the Girl Scout law hanging on her bedroom. So, that's the list of issues we had identified in advance. Is there anything else that a task force member would want to bring to the table?
Yeah, I can just share that, okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
Go ahead, you're-
October 6th, there's another picnic in Giroux. Obviously, it's a community, open to the community again. We had over 125 people last time. It was a blast for anyone who came, so please come, bring your blanket and the picnic and your family, and we're Paul Rapone's gonna have a table of all of what would happened on that site, during pre-Civil War encampment, so you get a little bit of history. We're gonna try to figure out a pre-Civil War history craft for kids, so we're gonna see what we can.
That could be a little dangerous.
Yeah, we found all kinds of crazy things, but we'll figure out something maybe behind.
Yeah, that's a good idea, yeah.
And then we'll probably have like cider and apples or something like that, so, please tell your friends, walk over,
That sounds good.
Yeah. let's make use of that park.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah.
thank you.
So I just, the timeline that was sent around, I just have a question in general, I'm just wondering, so the first thing on the timeline, it just says the pond was given to the town for conservation purposes, but I wanted to just try to clarify that, because I think, like, I know that the Wetlands Protection Act didn't really exist till like 72, and the pond was purchased in the 60s, so I'm just wondering, what was the original intent of the ponds? Do we know? I mean, I'm guessing it wasn't actually classified as conservation. It didn't really exist yet.
So it did, the Natural Resources Commission was established in 1959.
Oh, that, okay. I didn't know that.
The Conservation Commission Act, I think it was 1957, but is that right?
That's right.
So if you look at the deed, it says that it is to the inhabitants of the town of Concord, acting by and through the Natural Resources Commission. And anything that is owned by the commission or owned by the town under the care and custody of the commission is for conservation
Conservation.
purposes.
I didn't know that.
It's good to know.
Right, thanks, and keep great that you, thanks for,
Sounds like a Teddy Roosevelt thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that one of the oldest pieces of conservation land that we have then? Do you know?
It would be one of the oldest. I don't know which one is the oldest.
Yeah, that'd be pretty
Um,
close, wouldn't it?
yeah.
That would be
Yeah.
interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
It would.
Yeah.
so great reminder of that timeline and,
Yes,
intended to be
thank
a
you.
working document.
for that.
So, if folks have comments, suggestions on that, it's great. Right, so thanks.
Yeah.
Um,
If people do have comments on that,
yeah,
I think if you want to send those to the planning team and we can sort of do a revision if that's needed, but
Sure.
I think like Mark was saying that we don't really have a timeline. And that is an effort to provide something. It may not be fully comprehensive.
Mhm.
So if there are, thoughts or comments that people have, I think just send a note to the planning team.
great. Anything else from any task force members? Mine, I don't see anyone. Okay, so co-chair, I guess, Bill, we have another round of public comment. We have someone who's had their hand up for a while, so.
So I think everyone knows the rules, for public comments. Be respectful, avoid personal attacks, and keep your comments to no more than 2 minutes. So let's turn it over to whoever is ready to speak. Someone online that they've had their hand up for a while, you say?
Yeah.
We can't see.
We can't see them now.
William Gibson, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can, yes.
Oh, good. I have the opportunity to speak. I thank the committee for this opportunity. My family history on the pond is over 80 years with the Vigliottis and the Gibsons. We had a vegetable farm at the water's edge. My grandfather owned 20 feet out into the water. My concern is through the committee, I was wondering if you have any maintenance history of Warner's Pond since the 60s, because I remember when I was a child, we used to be able to drink the water out of the pond. It was so clean. Bacteria-wise, Sonny Payne had the water tested. Bacteria-wise, it was one of the cleanest ponds in Massachusetts. Also in the 60s, I remember as a child, I don't know who did the maintenance on the pond, but after realizing through an environmentalist that the fertilizers we were using in the garden and the state gardens and sewerage, drainage, and so forth and so on, chemical drainage, that's when the weeds started growing. And the technique they used to try and stay ahead of the growth of the weeds was to open the dam and drain the pond. They did this in the summertime, and it worked successfully twice. I remember as a child, they did it 2 different times in the summertime. Just recently, I spoke to an Army Corps engineer who told me the same thing can happen in the wintertime if the pond is drained. The freezing of the water and the ice will also kill off the plants. I also talked with the Army Corps engineer. I was so honored to be able to speak with him. First of all, he told me that one of the cheapest ways to get rid of the weeds in the pond is with biodegradable chemicals that are not harmful to animals or the fish. But he said later on, speaking with him, even though he said he could do a free evaluation of the pond if the committee or the town of Concord would contact him about that. But he later told me there was nothing he can do unless there was an endangered species on the pond that needed to be protected. Lately, I have seen a weed removal boat machine. I don't know how expensive it is, but I saw a videotape of it online and I tried to share it with the Warner's Pond committee online. The thing that concerns me the most is I have heard no discussion on draining the pond to try and take care of this invasive weed problem. Out of everybody I've talked to at the Giroux Park meetings and these Zoom meetings, I have heard nobody mention but me the maintenance history on the pond and how they did drain it successfully 2 times in the 60s and indeed were able to kill off the weeds and put the dam back together. My brother and I used to break the beaver dam on Neshoba Brook to keep the water level as high as possible and just so we'd have more ice skating time and space on the. We spent a lot of time on that pond, you know, after we got done doing all the work on the farm, my brother George and I, may he rest in peace, we spent all our waking hours on the pond. I learned how to skate and play hockey on that pond. I lived on that pond, fished it, hunted it, and tried to keep our land very well groomed. At 12 years old, I was turning over the soil in the garden, but I would like to see before my dying days this pond to be saved and cleaned up for future children like me. Like I said, my family altogether spent over 80 years on that pond. It is so very dear to me. I would hate to see it put back to its natural resource. I thank the Pale Manufacturing Company who built the dam, who built the pond, which allowed us as children to enjoy it thoroughly. I thank you so much for this opportunity to speak. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was very helpful, especially about the times when it was drained. You know, when we talk about drawdown, we're talking about draining it. So I want you to know we are very interested in looking into that option. So thank you again. That was very, very helpful for us.
I don't think we got his address.
Oh, Mr. Gibson, what was your address?
My address was, well, my grandparents first settled on Pond Street.
Now, we need to know
right
for
now?
now. Yeah.
I'm in low-income housing in Tingsboro, Massachusetts.
Oh, okay, no problem. So we need to know any more than that. You're in Tingsboro. That's all we needed to know.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
I went on Warner's Pond for the first time after 50 years and my heart sank because I was floating on a bed of weeds. The only place that had open water was over near Libby's Beach, where my brother and I used to jump out of the boat to go swimming because we knew it was the deepest part of the pond.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Somebody else want to speak? Anybody else? Any other person online? No?
Any other hand?
All right, anybody in the room want to say anything? Yep, yeah.
I wanted to go back and give you what Alyssa Brown, 5 Concord Green, sorry.
Yeah, listen.
With regard to, the fish situation, a little bit that I've learned in working with Lowell Parks and Conservation Trust. The first impediment to the fish movement is the Lawrence Dam, the Essex Dam in Lawrence, which is and when they talk about an elevator, it's a 10-foot by 10-foot sort of bucket that comes up and dumps the fish over. And it has had some problems with operation here, but I would say it was, the problem, actually, the biggest problem they had this year was that the bluefish found that this was a great place. for herring. So there was actually they had a great herring population at the base of the dam.
Wow.
And what they found is that the bluefish were eating them all.
Wow.
So they are working on a, bluefish exclusion, kind of a fence.
That's
next
interesting.
year to keep the bluefish from eating up all the herring. But even with that, there is a tremendous amount of fish that get by there and go up the Merrimack. They are not as much going up the Concord to any large degree. One of the first impediments is the fish ladder at Wamasett Falls at the Centennial Dam, which is just, it's a problem with the fish ladder. It just doesn't work very well. And they are actually working very much, they are in the design phase of getting rid of the ladder and going to a rocky
Passageway. Yeah.
on the other side of the
Good.
shore.
That's good to hear.
So they anticipate that to be done within a couple of years. So
That's
that
excellent.
was just one point about why they're not seeing as much fish.
That's great.
Nowadays.
Thank you.
I also I happened to go last week, Department of Ecological Restoration, the Charles River Watershed Association sponsored a site visit to the Montaquatic in Braintree, a major dam removal right in downtown Braintree. A very large dam that has been removed. And was removed last year, and you should see this, the vegetation that has come up, which is invasive free, and it has completely filled any area that's not rocky. That's not bedrock at this point.
That's interesting. That's in Braintree. Huh?
It's in downtown Braintree, and I have some photos available, and I'm sure they're available.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of situation, because it's a bedrock and they are actually putting a fish ladder in, and then there, but only because there is a MBTA tunnel, and it's a bedrock intersection, and there's only like a 4-foot space. So, they said, talking to Brad, fish removal is obviously not his first choice of technology to get fish moving upstream.
Yeah.
But in this particular case, it was the only thing they could do.
Yeah.
So it's sort of just saying, it's not that it's not done, but it's not their top choice of technologies to get fish moving upstream. And lastly, I just wanted to say, I appreciate you guys going out and do a site visit again. And I know it's hard to organize. It would be incredibly hard to organize an on the water site visit at Warner's Pond. But if there's any way any of you can get out on the pond, you get a much different perspective than just walking along the shoreline. It's to see the full extent basis.
Thank you. Anyone else? Comments? No, Chris, back to you.
Okay, all right. Well, with that, if no further business, then I will adjourn the meeting at 7:43. Right?
Yeah, did pretty well.
Okay, thank you so much. We're done.